Okay, so welcome everybody. We're in part 2 of Siman Lamed Bet. Good to see everybody's here. Welcome Lexi and Sarah, Josh, Asher, Yavni, Joel. Very nice to see everybody. So last time we went through this Gemara and we saw machloket, right? Somebody want to tell us what the machloket was? A hard one. It was.
So go for it, Yavni. Yavni, go for it, please.
No, please. You already started.
It was. I'm blanking right now. It's Rav Papa and Rav Shravya.
Rav Shravya.
Yeah, who doesn't show up very often in the Gemara, but against Rav and Ravina about whether or not when you write a shtar kiddushin, does a shtar have to be written midata or not?
Right. And what does the data mean?
That she knows it's being written to do kiddushin with her, seemingly.
Right. Like at the moment it's being written, it's almost as though she's writing it, but I mean, she's not writing it, but at the moment it's being written, she's aware of who that is being written for her. Which is kind of weird idea, just if you would ask anybody, you know. And right. And the logic to say that it would have to be that she knows about it is because she's makneh herself to him, and therefore, and that's similar to the get, where the husband is makneh her found. That was Josh. I muted you. And here, let me mute some more people. This is fun to mute people. I don't mute myself. Okay. Okay, so yeah, just like the husband can divorce his wife and he is makneh her to herself, she is makneh herself to her husband when she gets married. So she is she's the active participant in a sense. She's the one doing something. She's makneh herself. So therefore she has to be aware of the writing of the shtar kiddushin. Okay. And let's turn to the riff. Let's turn to the riff on the page that I sent out, or in your own books. It's page Hey Amud Bet in the riff. And it actually starts exactly at the top of the page. Here, maybe Lexi, you want to read the riff? But unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, just pulling it up. This is the one that you sent like separately with Rav, right? That Itmar Katva Lishma. All right.
Itmar Katva Lishma, yeah.
Itmar Katva Lishma v'sholom midata Rav Ravina Amrei Mikudeshet Rav Papa Rav Shravya Amar Ena Mikudeshet. Right, so this is the machloket we just described, that if it was written like for specifically her, but like she wasn't aware of it, Rav and Ravina say it's like it works, she's Mikudeshet, Rav Papa and Rav Shravya say she's not. V'hilchata kerav Papa Rav Shravya mishum de motivina alayhu de Rav Ravina mehadatanan in kotvin shtari erusin ela midat shnehem yafakav de mukmela b'shtari psikta. Rav Gidel, the Amar Rav Gidel, Amar Rav, Kama Atan Oten, Benecha, Kach Bakach, Kama Atan Oten, Techa, Kach Bakach, and Hen Advarim, Nickname Bamira.
All right, good, stop there. Right.
Well,
okay.
just the Hahushnuyahu Velosam Chlina Elahem.
Okay.
So that's like the first bit. So he says he inserts the psak that Hilchata.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I didn't know where. Yeah, good. Keep going.
Yeah, the Rif inserts like into the more his psak on it, which that he believes the halacha is like the Rav Papa and Rav Shravya opinion, and he explains which is that it must be ledata.
It must be the data, and therefore she's not mikudeshet if it's not the data, right? Okay.
Correct. And so he gives his reasonings as to why he thinks the halacha is like them. And so he thinks that this baraita raised is like a significant contradiction to Rav and Ravina, where it says like you can't write Shtare Erusin without the like knowledge of both of them. And even though in the Gemara we give like a teirutz to that for the Rav and Ravina opinion of being like, oh, it's actually this like shidduch, like a mount discussion kind of star. It's not actually the star of like kiddushin of like becoming mikudeshet. He says like it's just like a teirutz, but we don't like rely on that's like a teirutz like technically resolve this for everyone so that they could still have their opinion. But I think he's basically saying that like since we have this thing that does seem to pretty clearly be a contradiction and we have like a somewhat dachuk teirutz to it, that seems to end up more in the favor of Rav Papa and Rav Shravya than Rav and Ravina.
Right. So this is this interesting language, Shanuyahu. I looked it up on the Bar Ilan, CD, and it's actually only appears like 5 times in the or even less maybe, I don't remember, 3 or 4 or 5 times in the riff, and it's 2 of them are here and like 2 of them are, and like 3 of them are in Ketubot. I didn't check out exactly the other ones, but the other ones it's not a very common language, and it's Hahu Shanuyahu. I mean, it's very strange because if you just read it, it means like a teaching. Well, everything is a teaching, but right. But Lexi said correct.
Also is a teirutz.
Right. It's just a teirutz. In other words, he was pushed against the wall and he gave this teirutz. Okay. That's a very dangerous tool.
Continue?
Yeah. Well, just I want to continue. Yeah. All right. Continue. Just point out that's what it means. But continue.
No, it definitely also like presumably he's bringing that in as like I'm not sure that he would use that as like the singular reason to rule like
he's about to bring in.
He's about to bring in. Yeah.
He's about to bring in. You can't just. That's a very powerful tool. So you can't just say everything. You can say everything is a shanuya. Everything. Oh, that was just. I mean, that's what the Gemara is, isn't that? That's all the Gemara is giving terutzim. We thought they mattered. He's saying this one doesn't matter. So you have to go on, right? So go on.
Okay. And so additionally,
V'lo samchina.
Right, it says v'lo samchina aleha. Hahu shinuyahu v'lo samchina aleha.
Well, I think you should read it. I think right. I think that the lo samchina hahu, and then he's going to say why.
I think it's all one line. I think it's hahu shinuyahu v'lo samchina, like as in like that's just like a kind of dachuk teirutz. And we don't rely on that as being like definitive. Dehar Ashi Dehu Batra Hachi Ukma Beperak Hanoset Isha Bishtare Erisin Mamash Kirav Papa Rav Shavia Lememra Dehochta Kavotayo. So he's like it's just trying to like technically find a resolution for Rav Ravina. But what we see is that in this other barak, Rav Ashi seems to, the way the Rif reads it, understand the Shtari Erusin as being like Dafka Shtari Erusin sign. Since Rav Ashi is like,
well, I don't hear
the so last generation, he's authoritative. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. What's going on over in that other Gemara?
I mean, the other Gemara, the Ran cited some of it. I actually don't remember the entire context of the other Gemara, but that like it's not super related to this, like the topic of this Gemara Dafka, if I recall, but I think it's more that it brought in the like Shtari Erusin.
It brings in the same. Wait, let's stop here a second. Brings in that other Gemara brings in this same Memra. The whole source of our opinion that you do need it was because it says Shtare, the quote was like, I think it's a Mishnah, Shtare Erusin v'nisuin ena niktivin ela al dat shneihem. Now there have to be for both people, and that same Gemara is brought over in Ketubot.
Also the same story of Rav Gidel.
And also Rav Gidel. And over there, the Rif says, it's been settled that that's talking about real, regular Shitrei Erusin, not Psikta or whatever, or not these the discussions of Tanaim, but actual Harayat Mekudeshli. That's what that Gemara says. B'shitrei erusin mamash. And if that's the decision over there, and over here we have kind of maybe unclear whether this is it's almost as though the Rif is forced into saying it's a shnuya here because he wants to settle these two different Gemaras. The two different Gemaras are contradictory. This Gemara says it's for sure shitrei erusid, and the answer, and therefore he says that when it says over here that it's a psikta, that was just a shnuya. That was just a terrorist, but it's not really the truth. So he's basically taking.
Okay, and also, do you think that the difference is like in the other case, is it like that Rav Ashi is saying that it's Shtra Erisi Mamash versus like in this case, it's like the Stama providing a Shinuya?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. He does bring in that it's also Rav Ashi over there who's answering this, and maybe since he's the last opinion, that's more authoritative. But I don't think that's. Of course,
it is interesting because like also like Rav Ashi and Ravina are fundamentally like the same.
And Rav Papa is also very late.
Yeah.
Rav Papa is also very late.
Can I ask a question about that? When I was looking at this, I wasn't sure the language of Batra here, is that a statement that he's the last voice, that he's like the last word of the sugya, or is that a statement that he's like the last generation?
The last generation.
Okay, or a late generation.
I think it's time. I think it's time.
He's a late generation. Okay.
Well, we say that Ravina and Rav Ashi are the end of the Gemara. Rav Ashi, Behu Batra, he is later. He is the latest opinion. And we always say the halacha goes like the latter opinion, the more recent opinion. But I think the main gist of it is that, so fine. Either way, I think the main gist of it is that we have two contradictory Gemaras. He's sort of like being Tosfot. He has to settle the contradiction, and he's choosing the Ketubah because Rav Ashi is Batra. And therefore this Gemara is Shinuya. And so this very powerful tool, which is very dangerous. If you can say about any halacha that the Gemara says that was just a terrorist. So he doesn't use this very much, like I said, only 5 times. And I think it's only here because of this contradiction. Now, the Ran, I don't think we're going to look at it inside because it's very subtle, and the Ran basically says that there are 2 ways to learn this Gemara, and the Rif could be right, but there's another way to learn the Gemara, that they were only bringing that brisa. That there's no proof. Basically, I don't want to get into the details. That there's no proof that that really it's talking about shtar erusin mamish. There's 2 different ways to learn the Gemara, and therefore you can paskin the other way. And he actually brings poskim that prefer to paskin that you don't need the dat shnehen, or you don't need dat of the woman. So we have basically a machlok, the Rif and the Ran. The Rif saying that you need dat shnehen, paskening like Rav Papa and Rav Shrabia, and the Ran bringing other poskim that say you don't need the dat. Okay, that's basically all you need to know, I think. Because I don't want to go through the whole Ran, but if you did look at it, it takes quite a while to understand exactly what he's saying. But he's giving 2 different readings of the Gemara, and it's interesting. But I think what's really interesting here is just this Shinuya thing of the Rif. That in other words, this is a very powerful tool and a dangerous tool because you can use it to undermine anything. And basically, what's the Rif's rule? Only use it when you have no other choice. When you have 2 arguing Gemaras that you have to decide now. Although the only thing I'm a little bit questioning is this the only place where the 2 Gemaras that contradict each other? In other words, there must be many places like that. That's what Tosfos' bread and butter job is. So why so few times does the Rif say Hahu Shanuyu? Why Dafka here? I don't have maybe somebody has an idea.
In most cases you can find some. They'll give some tables. Well, when it says it there, it means one thing, and it's in one situation. When it says it here, it's in a different situation, it means something else. So they're
Right.
not really contradicting, even when they seem it. And for the Rif, this is one of those few times where he doesn't have that.
I really
Mhm.
do feel like it also might have to do with one of the contradiction being.
We don't hear you.
Let me know. Hear me now? No.
Now
Yeah.
we hear you.
No,
Okay. I really do think that it might have to do with the contradiction being between Rav Ashi and the resolution of the stomach. That I think there's a difference between the stomach like contradicting themselves, or like certain like a more or whatever contradicting themselves, versus like there's like a statement of Rav Ashi versus like the stomach often like as part of like their job isn't necessarily just to figure out what the halacha is, but also to kind of like structure and build out the opinions, right? And so they're interested in both raising contradictions and in like proposing resolutions to those contradictions. But I think maybe he's seeing it as like, okay, when the Sama doesn't always mean all of those resolutions as completely definitive halachic
You're saying-
resolutions. Sometimes it's
right.
almost more of like a structural or like literary thing. And so when you have that going up against an explicit statement of Rav Ashi, then he's like, okay, well, Rav Ashi actually like meant, he's like, it's like mamash star erusin.
Yeah, I
And the
understand
Stama
what
is
you're
just
saying,
trying
yeah.
to explain how we could save Rav and Ravina.
Good point. In other words, it's a good point. You can't. In other words, you're saying like this, that if you're not going to say Shanuyahu when it's a stop, when it's Rav Ashi saying it, you would say Shanuyahu when it's a Stama Gemara and the Gemara is just trying to answer a kasha. But if Rav Ashi actually says it, then he probably thinks it. So that far he wouldn't go, and that's why he chooses. That's why he chooses to reject the simple reading of our Gemara, the Gemara that we read. Okay, very nice. Any other comments on that? Okay. So let's see the halacha, actually. Let's go to the tour and see how he paskins. Okay, so Lamed Bet. Masha, you want to read the tour?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
בשטר, כיצד כותב לה על הנייר או על החרס, אף על פי שאין בו שווה פרוטה, הרי את מקודשת לי, או באחד הלשונות, ונתנו לה בפני שני עדים, וצריך לכותבו מדעתה, ולשמה, ואם שלא לשמה, כותבו אינן קידושין. Should I stop there or should I keep going through the whole thing?
Yeah, summary or translate what we just read.
Sure. With the shtar, how is the sun? It is written on a paper or on the ceramic. And even though the actual physical document itself isn't worth the puta, nevertheless, he can say the formula Hayat Mekudeshet Li in one of its formulations. And give it to
He doesn't
her.
say it, he writes it.
I'm sorry, he writes it. And then it's given to her with two edim, I guess, of the transmission.
Right, edim of Sirah, exactly. Right, edim of the transmission. Good.
And it needs to be written with her knowledge and also in her name. And if it is not written in her name,
Lishma, I think, means on her behalf and not for some. In other words, it could be written with her dot, but not on her behalf. Like she knows it's being written, but she doesn't know it's being written for her. I mean, you could try to imagine a case like that.
I thought it was. I'm sorry. I thought that was an example of the documents that the scribes were leaving blank until the moment of knowing who the parties were. That they were writing these formulaic. I think I've seen them in places in the Gemara that they write formulaic documents and they leave spaces. and then the parties would fill in their names at the time. And that's what I thought lishma means,
Oh,
that it's like an abstract
I don't think that's what
contract.
that's very interesting if you say that. Maybe you're right. That's a very interesting idea.
But
I understood it totally the opposite, that it has to be written from beginning to the end with her in mind.
right, I think it's maybe two ways of saying the same
No, but you
thing.
couldn't
You
use a
can't write.
pre-written document and just fill in the name. You'd have to have from the beginning of when the Sofer started writing, the words Harei At Mikudeshet Li have to be also written for Reuven to give to Leah.
Yes,
That's the way I understand.
I think we're saying the same thing, that it couldn't be a document that's written in general and then her name as an afterthought. But maybe
Right, right, okay. Midata
Um,
v'lishma. It also has to be written for her sake.
Okay, if it is not written with her knowledge and for her sake, then there are no kiddushin. Katvu.
Wait. Read that
Inan
again.
kiddushin.
Actually, look at that carefully. V'tzarich likotvo midata v'lishma. You need to write it with her knowledge and for her sake. Ve'im shelo lishma. But if you didn't write it for her sake, einan kiddushin. What does he leave out there?
Lidata.
Right. If you read that carefully, you would say lidata is just an ideal thing, but not required.
Well, that's what it's gonna address in the
Yeah.
next line.
Exactly. So go ahead.
כתבו שלא מדעתה, רב רבינה אמרי מקודשת, ורב פאפא ורב שרביה אמרי אינה מקודשת.
Right.
ופסק רב אלפס כרב פאפא ורב שרביה, וכן כתב רבינו חננאל,
Yeah.
וכתב עוד, ויש אומרים שהלכה כרבא ורבינה, וצריך עיון.
Oh, he leaves it as a tzarik iyun. Well, go on. V'kein pasak.
והגאות,
Baal ha'halchot gedolot, Bahag.
אוקיי, כרבא ורבינה, וכתב אבי,
אדוני אבי הראש ז"ל.
אדוני אבי הראש ז"ל, כיוון דאפילו בא רבותא אבדינן לחומרה. וכן כתב הרמה מקודשת מספק.
So translate that, well, we saw he just brings the machloket, but and then he says, wait, so who paskins like each side?
So Rav Alfas and Rav Papa were on the side of Eina Mekudeshet. And
So
then,
in other words, the Rif is Rav Alfas and Rabbeinu Hananel. So the Rif and the Rabbeinu Hananel were like Rav Papa and Rav Shravia, which is that that you need to have that.
okay.
V'yesh omrim shahalacha k'rava v'ravina. There are others who hold like Rava and Ravina that you don't need. It's arihin v'ken pasach ba'al hilchot gedolot. It's not. I don't know exactly what that means. V'ken pasach.
I think it's the Rabbeinu Hananel says that the Rabbeinu Hananel says v'yesh omrim shahalacha k'rava v'ravina tzarich iyun. That's Rabbeinu Hananel's quote, and then the tool is coming back. V'chen pasak bahag k'rava v'ravina. There, the tool is identifying the Yeshomim. Maybe.
Right. Okay. Good. V'ken pasach ba'al hilchot k'rava ravina. So now who has his father, Paskin? The Katav Adoni Avia Rojzal. The Kevan de Ifliguba Ravuta Avdina L'Chumra. The Ken Katav Harama, the Rav Avulafia, the Mikudeshet Misafra. So what does the Rosh say? Ifliguba Ravuta Avdina L'Chumra. Since there was a big argument about this, there's major opinions on both sides, we are going to behave in a chumrah way, in a strict way, which would mean that you'd have to do the kedushin over again, but you wouldn't be able to get away without giving a get if you wanted to separate. So essentially, you do need midat.
Rav Nachum?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I didn't think about it, but the Torah's language at the beginning sounds like lechatchila, you definitely need midata. And really the only question is, what if you didn't do it midata, right? Like lechatchila, you shouldn't do it this way. But the avad, if you didn't, then it's a debate, and we act lechumra on that.
And what does it mean to be the chumrah? So the chumrah means if you didn't do it, you want to get divorced, you have to give a get. And if you didn't do it and you want to stay married, you have to write a new document. So let's see. So the Beit Yosef, I basically just brings what we just saw in the Rif and the Ran. And he brings the Rambam. Does he say, did anyone notice anything else? I don't think there's anything really that important that the Beit Yosef brings here. Unless somebody saw something they want to mention. Let's see how he paskins. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch.
Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, maybe you can read. Yeah, go ahead. In Shulchan Aruch Lamed Bet Sif Aleph.
בשטר כיצד? כותב לה על הנייר או על החרס, ואף על פי שאין בו שווה פרוטה, הרי את מקודשת לי, ונותנו לה בפני עדים, so that's exactly what we had before, וצריך שיכתוב אותו לשם האישה המתקדשת, כמו בגט. ואם כתבו שלא לשמה, אינה מקודשת, ואינו כותבו אלא לדעתה. ואם כותבו שלא לדעתה, הרי זו ספק מקודשת.
Right. So he's paskening, isn't he paskening the same as Tur? I think so.
But I don't think that it's relevant that he adds the fact that we have to learn this from Get and not just independently. I don't know if I'm sorry, I came a little bit late, so I don't know if you talked about this already.
You mean the words come over get?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually going to be our whole. Yeah, I mean, in order to understand this sugya, you really have to understand Gittin and all the different rules. Basically, what's going on is we have this comparison to Gittin, and we don't know how much to compare, how many different aspects of Gittin to compare.
Or Rav Nachum, as you put last time, we don't know which way to compare it, right? Is it gender to gender or makne to makne, right?
Well, that's one thing, no, but there are other things. We're also going to talk about Ede Masira and Ede.
In Sif
all
Aleph.
kinds of what?
Yeah, in Sif Aleph for the moment.
Yes, for the moment, no, but the data is just a question of you're saying you're right. For this, it's definitely we're comparing it, but how do we compare it? Right. And then how many aspects? Okay, so that's enough, I think, for that topic, which is the data. Now we have another topic. And for that, you should go to the Gemara in Kiddushin Mem Chet. So just to summarize, we see that there's a machlokas about whether you need ladata. There doesn't seem to be much machloket about whether you need lishma, so it definitely has to be lishma. But ladata is a machloket, but in the lamaisa, it doesn't really matter. You have to do it in both ways. Okay, so let's go to this Kiddushin Mem Chet Amud Aleph. It's on the source sheet that I shared with everybody. Or you can open it up yourself. I'm going to look at the source sheet because it's easier. And maybe Sarah, you want to read?
Sure, hold on one second. I'm just going to look at it in my Gemara because I wrote things in the margins.
Yeah, I wrote things in the source sheet. You notice I threw some English into the source sheet. I don't usually do, but I just.
Oh yeah.
My own
I realize
notes.
I have the old the old source sheet. Okay, fine.
No, there's only one because it's shared. I mean,
Oh yeah, but I copied it into
You
my own
copied it,
document
gotcha.
earlier. Error of my ways. Okay, fine. So we're on Tet Amud Aleph. So I understand
that's the
where we
beautiful thing of a source sheet which you share. You can write nothing on it, and then as you go, just add. But I didn't do that.
Alright.
Okay, go
All
ahead.
right, so
So it's Nema
Uh,
Kitanai. We're starting in a funny place, but I just jumped in the middle here. It says Hitkadshi li bishtar. That's where it is.
It's Memched Amud Aleph. I think I heard that you
Yeah,
said.
Memched Amid Aleph. We're
Fine.
discussing using a malve, mikadshin bit. Are you allowed to marry somebody with a loan? That's our question. It seems to be it's a machloket, and we're trying to settle that machloket. The Gemara is in the middle of settling how valid is using a loan for marriage.
okay, here we go. Nema Ketanai, Hikashi li bishtar. Rabbi Meir Omer, Eina Mikudeshet. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Mikudeshet. V'achamim Omrim, Shamin Taniyar, V'im yesh bo shavei pruta, Mikudeshet, Im lav, Eina Mikudeshet. Okay, so someone comes along and says, marry me with this star. Rabbi Meir says she's not Mikudeshet. Rabbi Elazar says she is Mikudeshet. Hachamim say basically treat it as if it's kesef, figure out how much the paper that it's written on is worth and go according to that.
Right. Now there's a lot of meaning here in this statements and everything that's going on here, because first of all, notice that a side point almost, it says Hitkadshi li bishtar, which already seems to be bringing a case where you're not just giving her the star, you're saying a certain formula. Hitkadshi li bishtar. And then it's to become a halachic question. Do you need to say that formula? Or can you just hand her the star? It's written on the star, Harayat Mikudeshet li. Why would you say it twice? You don't say Harayat Mikudeshet li. You don't say marry me with the following words, Harayat Mikudeshet li. You don't introduce you don't need, why do you have to say, if star works, it should work without you saying it kadshi li b'shtar. It should just be, he gave her a star. So that's interesting that the Gemara has this, that this is the, Tanaitic argument here is about a case where hitkadshi li b'shtar, where he said something, and then it becomes a question whether you need to say something when you give the star.
It doesn't seem so crazy to think that you would need to say it, because in all the other cases, there needs to be an active amirah and then some kind of other, like for kesef, there has to be amirah and then some masir, like kinyan or masira or something.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So this is basically parallel. And it's like the fact that the star happens to say that is just like a feature of it being a star, in the way that, I don't know, the kesef having certain kind of value is a feature of kesef, but it doesn't have to be redundant.
I agree with you very much. But Joel, what do you want to say?
Yeah, two things. One is there is like the sense that the words in the star take the place of the words you say, right? In some ways, right? It's because you do right. Hikachili, in the star itself, but also it's almost like I never realized that it's like the question really at hand here is I use a star, but I use the formula of kesef, right? I save the words and I hand an object that's not, which you hand an object with the star too, but here I use the words. And so like now the question is what's going on? Am I trying to marry her with the star? Am I trying to marry her with kesef? And how do I judge this case? It's like an in-between case. And in that case, the Chachamim are like, yeah, you just assume it's kesef, right? Because he used the formula of kesef. And the debate between the other two is like, well, wait a second, maybe she thinks it's a star. That he's trying to do kinyan star and not kinyan kesef, and so that's the problem here. So. Or maybe
there's something intertwined between, because what do the Chachamim say? They say samin et aniyar, and if it has a pruta in it, then it's mikudeshet. Even though presumably he wasn't trying to marry with kesef.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something inherent in star that incorporates kesef always.
Or he hit the formula. He hit the kesef formula at the end of the day, right?
Are you saying the formula?
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, we'll think about it. I have a theory about that, but we'll get to it. So the machlokus Rabbi Elazar and
Maybe just
Rabbi Meir. Yeah, Josh.
The bet in Bishtar, has two meanings, right? It's Hitkachili through the mechanism of shtar, or Hitkachili like betabatzo with the worth of the shtar.
Now,
It
is
could
it
mean
by
both of those.
means of star, or is it
So because of the ambiguity, then the
with
Chachamim
this
say
object?
you can change afterwards.
Well, we're going to see there's ambiguity of what exactly is going on. The Gemara is going to debate what exactly is going on. What is this case at all? It's not clear. So go on, Sarah. Hi, star.
Hi star heichli dami. So what is this star? Hilemas star chiyuv de acherim kasha
Starchov.
Sharchov, de acherim kasha de Rebbe Meir as a Rebbe Meir. So if it's an IOU that's like from some other person, then then Rebbe Meir seems to be contradicting himself.
Right. In other words, I have like somebody wrote me a check. Somebody wrote me a check for $100, and I haven't yet cashed it. And so I go and give it to her. I sign it over to her, or I give it to her in a way that she can now collect the $100. So if that's the case, so then it's a kasha Rebbe Meir on Rebbe Meir. Well, we don't care exactly why, but that wouldn't fit the Rebbe Meir. So go on.
Okay, Elevastar for day. Rather, no, it has to be like an IOU like from him.
Right. In other words, or well, I don't know exactly if it's from him. Oh, it could be right. I'm not sure what it means. Does it mean that he writes to her, "I owe you $100 here. Now marry me with that," or is it that she owed him $100? I guess it's the first case. Yeah.
I thought it was the first case.
Yeah,
that she writes. Then it would be parallel for.
She writes a check. He writes a check. Here's a check for $100. Here it is. And
I thought it was I thought it was the other case because it's because
well, the other case. What's the other case?
B'milveh.
The other case is what? That she. Oh, what? That she
I
borrowed
was
money
confused
from
by
him.
this, to be honest. I wasn't confident. I understand.
It could say that she borrowed money from him, and then he was mevatel the chiyuv that she had. But I think nobody's going to say that. That's a problematic thing because then there's no actual transfer at the moment. I think there's another Gemara that goes against that. In other words, if I just mevatel a chov that the woman had, if the man mevatels a chov the woman has to her, then nothing actually there's no actual transfer. We want there to be some paper going some direction.
Right, but that's what we called. When we said we couldn't do that. We said it's because you can't do kiddushin b'milveh, and this says uvemekadesh b'milveh kamiflige. That's why I thought that's what they're.
Okay, so maybe it is that. Okay, you're right.
I don't know,
yeah,
but I
exactly.
didn't. I was. Yeah.
You're right. I'm thinking of that other Gemara. That's the way I thought it was. Well, I guess it also doesn't really matter for our purposes. So let's go on. Kadesh b'milveh kamiflige. So it's didi day. So maybe it is that he's mevatel a debt that she has to him, or maybe it's something else.
Did you have D-Day in there? Because my Gemara has D-Da.
Sorry, D-Da, you're right. D-Da. Yeah, I read it wrong.
Right. So then it really has to be what Yavne is saying, right? It's that she has a.
Yeah, she has a debt.
She owes him.
And he's canceling it.
Yeah, Rashi says sheyesh lo milveh alea, right?
Great.
Okay, thank you. Sheyesh, what? Sheyesh
lo milveh aleha. That which I can actually read both ways, truth be told. Like he's not so great with the pronouns there.
No, but it's sheyesh, that it already exists.
It does.
Right. So we have other Gemaras that say it doesn't work, but fine. Okay, so maybe that's what they're arguing about. So go ahead.
Okay. Amar Rav Nachum bar Yitzchak, hacha b'mayaskinan, kegon shekitsha b'shtar. So Rav Nachum or Yitzchak asked the question, what are we actually talking about here? We're talking about when she did kiddushin, when they did kiddushin with a shtar.
I think you
need yeah, which doesn't have the edim presumably written on it.
In other words, we're actually talking about shtar kiddushin here. We're not talking about milveh at all. We're talking about shtar kiddushin. But then, of course, it would be obvious that it works. Why would there be a machloket? The machloket is because she'en edim, she'en alav edim. That which edim? Which edim are we talking about? Edim of what are the two choices?
It seems like it's the edim who are signed on the document.
It seems like that, right? It does seem like that because alav.
Yeah.
That it doesn't contain in it edei chatima. Okay, so go on.
Right. Rabbi Meir Latame, the Amar Edei Chatima Karas. So like, right. So
38.
that makes it for Rabbi Meir because he seems to in general require those signatures. Rabbi Elazar Latame, the Amar Edei Masira Kartik. No, but then that makes, and also that if Rabbi Elazar like can sort of follow his own opinion by saying that this is talking about not having the Edei Masir.
In other words, what is Rabbi Meir Omer Eino Mikudeshet? Because there were no Edei Chatima here. And he requires Edei Chatima. And Rabbi Elazar says that she is Mikudeshet because we don't need Edei Chatima. Right? We don't need Edei Chatima, we just need Edei Masira. And therefore, it doesn't, the fact that it didn't have Edei Chatima is not a problem. For sure it had Edei Masira. And so therefore it's kosher.
And then V'Rabbanan Misafka Lahu, Ika Rabbi Meir, Ika Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbanan can't decide like who they want to side with. Hilkaf Shaminat Aniyar, V'im Yesh Bo Shavei Pruta Mekudeshet, Im Lav Einu Mekudeshet. So that's, they like take the middle road essentially by not having to decide that question at all and only relying on the business about whether it's essentially treated like kesef.
Right. And somehow they believe that in Edei Shtar, you can have always kesef. Somehow also marrying through kesef in this way.
Well, right. I don't totally understand how it's the case that Rabbanan's approach actually dodges the problem rather than just siding with Rabbi Elazar. Because it seems like they still believe that there has to be edim to the transfer of the object. If they're treating it like kesef, then there have to be those witnesses, which is precisely what Elazar is trying to do. So I don't really see why.
No, everybody agrees there were Edei Masira. Everybody agrees there were people watching. So if he had given her money instead of a shtar, everybody would agree it would work. But Rabbi Meir comes along and says, yeah, but that shtar was not a good shtar.
I see. Okay, yes.
No, that shtar was not a good shtar. It's a puzzle shtar. And therefore, only way it would work according to Rabbi Meir is if the shtar itself had value and it was given as a kind of money.
But I think they're really siding with Rabbi Meir, right? They're saying like, because if we want to do the kiddushin by shtar, then they are saying that it needs to be. They just have a different machloket with Rabbi Meir whether or not you can.
Well, they don't know how to. They're like the Rosh. They don't know how to paskin, so they're chomer according to both opinions. And if you want to be yotze, you'll call it deyot, and not use money.
Wait, but that's not machloket.
Then you would need to have. Then that's not the case they're talking about. Is there's no edei chatima. But if there would be edei chatima, then everybody agreed it would.
Right. But they're not being machmir on both opinions because the machmir opinion would say that they are mikudesha because then you're requiring a get. They're taking the makil opinion as long as there isn't a.
Oh, you're right. Why do they? You're right. It's a good point.
So they're siding with Rabbi Meir. Except they have a different disagreement. Yeah.
Imlav eino mikudeshet. That's a very strange statement. It should say mikudeshet misafek. Because for two reasons. First of all, maybe Rav Elazar is right. And secondly, maybe it's worth a pruta in some other look in Madai.
Well, I don't know that we have to assume they're bringing in Shmuel's opinion at this level, but
the Tosfot actually changed. I didn't look at the Rashi, but the Tosfot changed the gear said that they get rid of the Eino Mekudeshet. They say right, Zelo garas b'motehu v'im lav Eino Mekudeshet. Hafilu leka b'niyar shavei pruta tzricha get mi safek. Right.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense. So Tosfos is thinking about everything together. And
right.
It shouldn't say Eino Mekudeshet, it should say Safek Mekudeshet.
Rashi, I think, says like that the like basically says that the language isn't quite right about them being in Safek. That like for this machloket that we're discussing in the Gemara here, they side with Rabbi Meir, but then they have a different machloket with Rabbi Meir about whether you can intend a shtar and do a kesef.
But look at I brought up Rashi Eino Mekudeshet. Afilu, he says, you see that right? Eino Mekudeshet, but afilu haniyar shavei pruta. He holds Eino Mekudeshet. The lav dat knows now we can go back and say, well, why did Rabbi Meir not say this? Why did Rabbi Meir not say that if there's a pruta in the star, then he would agree that it would work? Why does he say in a total sense, Eino Mikudeshet? So he says, the lav daite lehit kadesh bepruta taniyar, because her opinion, her mind is not focused on marrying, she's not thinking about marrying with the niyar. Ela b'mad kativ ben. So that comes out to be a machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Meir, right? The Rabbi Meir holds that she doesn't think that, but the Rabbanan hold that she's putting everything together. Plus the star is probably worth a pruta in Madai. Yeah. Well, Rav Elazar Omer Mekudeshet, afilu ein b'niyar shavei pruta, kedem efarish time elakaman imishum de mekadesh b'malva mekudeshet. That could be one reason, because if it's malva, or imishum kedem eshanin elakaman. All right, it doesn't matter. But the main one actually is that first Rashi. Eino mekudeshet, because even though, because her dot is not on it. So it must be the rabbis think that she's also interested in the money, in the monetary value of the paper. And then it comes an interesting question. What if you give a get on a paper that has Isser Hana, like Avodah Zarah paper, or some paper that you're not, or whatever way it got to be Isser Hana? Is it kosher? And I saw somebody, first of all, it was brought in the Ramah that it's not kosher. And I saw an explanation that said, well, it's because it's as though the words are written in the air. They're floating off because the paper is not really there. You saw that, Lexi? Where did I see that? I couldn't.
The Beit Yosef quotes that, I think.
The Beit Yosef quotes that? Yeah. So he says it's floating in the air, the letters, because once it's like the famous statement in the Gemara about the etrog of the Ir Nidachat. It says if you can't shake an etrog of Ir Nidachat, even though it's right there in front of you. They say because ein lo shir, it has no size. Why is no size? Because the Ir Nidachat has to be burnt to the ground. So this etrog should be burnt to the ground. So it's like it's not there. So this paper is not there because it's aser b'hana'ah. So they're floating in the air. So I learned from that Kiddushin star requires a paper that has value. So there is sort of inherent, in other words, it has to have some value. It has to be something. Everything has value.
Or it cannot not have value.
Okay, you can say it that way.
No. It's a basis in and of itself, but it still is a basis.
But I'm saying it has to have some value. But I want to say,
but you can't take it so much that it has to have like an equal value. It has to.
Well, I'm trying to explain the chachamim of saying why, if there's a pruta there, it works. Even though he said Harayat Mikudeshet Li B'Shtar Zu, he's trying to marry her obviously by shtar. Why can we assume that she's also thinking, oh, I'm getting a piece of paper? Because if it would be a paper that she couldn't get, that was Hana'ah, he said, but I want the paper back. Well, that's a different question. But if the paper had no value, then it wouldn't work. Well, that means that there's some inherent kesef going on here.
Right,
too.
so it cannot not have value.
It cannot not have value.
It can't be valueless.
Right.
I agree that.
So therefore, every Kiddushay star is a shtickle, if I can use that Yiddish word, is a shtickle Kiddushay kesef. It has a little bit of kesef to it. And that's what the Chavim are saying here. That's what the Gemara here is saying. That as long as the pruta there, then I don't care if the star is puzzle, because every Kenyan star is a little bit on kesef. Rabbi Lannis.
Yeah, but Yavni is just now acting up and saying that dafka is something which is always in air and never is on paper, is a digital share. What did you say there?
I'm wondering, how does, if you had a digital star, if I texted a star,
digital star,
would that
something
count as letters floating in there?
No, it's no cue. No good.
Okay.
No good.
Well, according to what I'm saying, it might not be any good, right? But maybe it's a chiddush. It's an idea.
Right.
What I'm saying. I'm not saying I have no better proof than trying to explain this Gemara. So what did I write?
Shinuya here. Shinuyahi. You're answering up the Gemara.
So now, basically, what we see here is that there's a big machloket what kind of witnesses you need. Do you need witnesses at the time of giving? Do you need witnesses at the time of writing? It seems from the Gemara, I would say on a surface reading, that you need Eidei Masira, watching the event, but what you don't necessarily need Eidei Chatima, that people to actually write on the document, we are witness that this document was written and, for this woman. Except Rav Meir holds you do need that. Now, Joel, did I ask you to read this next piece?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in my source sheet, we have Aruch HaShulchan Siman Kuf Lamed Gimel, which is way up in the future, but it's always strange. Why did they put Kiddushin before Gerushin?
It's the pasuk, right? Kikach ishisha usneav,
No, because it's a Gemara.
No,
I don't want to say
the
never mind.
opposite.
Well, in the Gemara, it's the opposite order.
It's because there's more chapters in Gittin than there are in Kiddushin. That's
You're right. That is the reason. You're right. That is the Rambam actually says that's. I think the Rambam says that. That is the reason. Yes. Okay. So Kiddushin. Also, you can't get divorced if you didn't first get married. It's impossible.
So.
Pretty much. In this world. Okay. So let's look at this.
I'm sorry. You were explaining what?
Nothing. I'm just tangential remark.
That what? Let me catch. I want to understand.
Oh, I was just saying that this Siman Kuf Lamed Gimel is Gittin, and it's later than where we are because we're in Kiddushin. And I'm just saying the order in the Gemara is first Gittin and then Kiddushin, and here it's first Kiddushin and then Gittin. That's all I'm saying.
But you know the reason why Gittin comes before Kiddushin.
I don't want to say one.
Okay.
It's 7 chapters versus 4 chapters, though, right? Is that the?
Yeah, something like that.
That's one way of saying it. Okay.
I know. I'm just gonna leave it there. So
okay.
All right.
So go on. So now we're talking about this. The point. Why am I bringing this Aruch HaShulchan? Because we have to talk a little bit about this whole Eidei Masira and what. Because in order to understand what we have to do in a ketubah, we have to understand what we have to do in a get. So we have to look over here in Hilchas Gittin.
All right. Da tarif zal deha desfirle Rabbi Elazar Eidei Masira Karte Rotzel Amar af Eidei Masira Karte, right? Umodeh leRabbi Meir de gam Eidei Chatima bilvad Karte. So he thinks the debate is everybody agrees that if there's just Eidei Chatima that it works. And the chiddush of Rabbi Elazar is that without Eidei Chatima and just having Eidei Masira, that works too. So,
right. In other words, there were no, like the Gemara said, there were no Eidei Chatima over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there, and Rabbi Meir holds you must have Eidei Chatima, and Rabbi Meir says no, but you could have made a Masira, but he doesn't hold. What doesn't he hold? He doesn't hold that if you just have Eidei Masira,
that works. He doesn't think that. Yeah. So.
No. Sorry, I said it wrong.
No, I think you said it right.
Yeah.
You said it right because everybody agrees that if you just have Eidei Chatima, it works.
Exactly. What he doesn't say, right? He's not arguing that if you don't have Eidei Masira, but you do have Eidei Chatima, that he agrees with Rav Meir that works.
Mm-hmm.
Which fits the Gemara. That fits the Gemara, right? It doesn't contradict anything in the Gemara.
No, it's just really nice. So, Uchshit chatmu alav edim umasar la get beino levena have get mina Torah, right? So if it's just according to the Torah, if there's just chatima, everyone agrees that is a get. That's a kosher get. So, okay, v'dayakla V'diakla probably.
Wait, beino levena means there's no witnesses.
Yeah, without edim. So. V'diakla mitakanat Rabban Gamliel, right? The takanat Rabban Gamliel is that he requires Eidei Chatima from everybody, if I remember correctly. al gitim, no matter what. The salkadatach de belav ede mesira lav klum hu eza takana yesh beide chatima, right? So, if it's, well, he's like, let me keep going. Hello, im tavia get lefanenu, akate nechush shemanim sar la below ede mesira, right? So this takana of Rabban Gamliel that everyone needs to put ede chatima on, you have to have ede chatima on every get. That's a worthless takana if we still have this worry that Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar thinks that only ede mesira work, right? Because in that case, if that opinion is still out there, there's an idea that any get that we see that, yeah, it has ede chatima, but who cares? We don't know anything about the mesira, and therefore per Rabbi Elazar, it wouldn't work. So it must be Rabbi Elazar agrees that works if there's just ede chatima. Did I explain that well? I don't know if I did, but
so why do we need Rabban Gamliel is saying we need to have ede chatima because it's required to have.
No, but he's saying essentially like he gets us by having that takana, he gets us out of the machloket, and it must be therefore the machloket is only about whether or not just ede mesira work.
No,
everybody agrees.
Because if it was a machloket, a kitzoni machloket, an extreme machloket, then his takana would only help for Rabbi Meir, but it wouldn't help for the other opinion, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Unless his motivation was something else.
Exactly, which he doesn't, he's not saying here. So but okay.
The takana is just saying we side with Rabbi, is making a takana to enforce Rabbi Meir's opinion.
No, that's exactly the opposite of what he's saying. He's saying it's not that he's taking a side, it's that he's trying to get out of the problem. If we have always ede chatima, then everybody agrees it works.
So he's saying, right, he's saying maybe Rabbi Elazar is right, but I'm going to make a takana that says we have to rule like Rabbi Meir anyway.
Well, it would be like every,
no, because Rabbi Elazar would be very happy to have ede chatima because then you also have no problem. You don't even need ede masira now.
Sorry, let me just ask. Could you repeat what is the takana?
That you always have
the takana
signatories on the get.
Oh, okay. So isn't that Rabbi Meir's opinion? That
no, it's Rabbi Meir's opinion is that I'm going to mess up the opinions now. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar, according to the Aruch HaShulchan, both believe ede chatima work. Rabbi Elazar just happens to have an opinion that you don't have to have ede chatima.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is Rabbi Meir thinks that you need to have ede chatima.
Yes, and Rabbi Elazar thinks if you have them, great, that works. And if you don't have them, you can have ede mesira, and that works as well, right?
And the takana then is to say that you need.
Everyone should put chatima, have ede chatima, just to make sure that we never run into a problem. If because how do you prove? What if you can't find the ede mesira? Here you have the document where you actually have the names. So
of course you could say differently. You could say, well, of course you have the ede mesira. And the fact that he was saying always put ede chatima was just to make sure that Rabbi Meir's opinion would be fulfilled. But of course you need ede mesira because we have a rule. Actually, I don't know if he's about to say that, but does he say that anything with arayot needs witnesses?
He does, yeah.
So go on. Okay. I'm just saying, but the way the Rif is understanding it is that the machloket is that everybody agrees you need ede chatima, and he proves that from the takana of Rabban Gamliel. And Rabbi Elazar says, but if you don't have them, ede mesira is also enough.
So, nakat nechushama nifsarla below ede mesira. Ela vaday desage beede chatima bavad. For sure, that's enough. Just ede chatima. V'chein hu data Rambam beperak Aleph veravad veramban for Rabbeinu Yerucham. I think anytime the Ravad and the Rambam agree, by the way, we should just go home. And v'gam meha rashba. V'gam meha rashba near ekitsat.
Anytime the Rambam and the Ramban agree, we should go home.
Oh, that's also a good point. Yeah, it's a lot of opinions who never
remember the Ravid mostly agrees with the Rambam. He only argues on small things.
Yeah. So
okay.
But there's a lot of very strong weight in that.
Yes.
Okay. V'ikasha he'achev sharshi garesh below edim. All right. Taritz dechashvinan he'edim hachatumim ke'ilu omdim lefaninu. So you say, well, wait a second. How is it possible that you can have a mesira, which is that's when the gerushin actually happens with no edim? right? And he says, so essentially what happens is the people who signed, it's as if they were there for the actual Masira.
I think all of this, by the way, is a quote of the Rif, I think, but I'm not sure.
I didn't look. So
I didn't look either, but it says Taritz. It sounds like
Yeah.
Rif explains.
So
this is a really weird idea. That
So.
once they have signed, it's as though they're in front of us. In other words, I think you can explain it better in a few words later. But in other words, the fact that they've signed, it's as though we have witnesses of the giving over. But go ahead.
Okay. V'yesh merashanim shespira inyan be'ofen zeh. Okay, it's a different way. Devadai sfirale Rabbi Elazar derake de mesira karte velo ede chatima. So this is the way originally we understood the debate. Rabbi Elazar thinks it's only ede mesira, and Rabbi Meir thinks it's only ede chatima. Umikol makom modeh de ede chatima mahani below ede mesira. Mipnei shemesira koretet kol sheyesh b'shata edim. Bein shehem me'idim al mesira atzma o al gufa davar. All right, so he says, so he's all about edei mesira, but if there weren't edei mesira, right, but there happened to be edei chatima, right, it's that the mesira kind of establishes, affects what actually the people signed about at the beginning is what happens, right? So it's like they sign the get, and then the Masira is what like puts their signatures into effect, I think is the way to put that, or something like that. It's
in other words, when we know that the Masira happened because the woman says she has it, it's in her hands. When the Edei Chatimot signed it, it was not in her hands, and it was the Baal wrote it. When she has it, we know the Masira happened. And there are witnesses because there are witnesses in the get. So we have kind of knowledge of everything that needs to be known.
Yeah. So, umata mashimo de Rabbi Elazar de chatima mahani. So that he's agreeing that ede chatima do work. Afal pi shalonatan be'ede mesira la mishum de ede chatima karte. He doesn't agree that ede chatima are like that. Once you put those signatures on, that affects the thing. Actually, ela shemesira koretet. But the actual giving is what does it. Kevan sheyesh edim alikar hadavar, right? Dehavulahu ede chatima kede mesira. It's like there were edim chatima, and then when you give it over, it's like that witnessing goes into effect, or what they witnessed went into effect, essentially. So, sharia get yotzeh mitachat yado beedim halalu. That it's like there with those edim. The get left his hand. And of course, everyone knows, like Rav Nachum was saying, he gave her the get. And it's as if they actually witness it. Because, it's not like he's going to write it and then all of a sudden the get's in her hand. It's like, of course he gave it to her. So, although we can create interesting cases where that's not the case. But
So basically what we're saying here is that Rav Elazar says you need Edei Mesira, and you don't need Edei Chatima at all, and they don't help. But actually, these Edei Chatima are Edei Masira. And so, I mean, push comes to shove, it comes out that it's pretty much the same opinion. Either way, you're going to say it comes out that you need that Edei Masira is enough for everybody.
It does work better with the language of the Gemara a little bit, the second.
Right, because he's saying the karti, the cutting is by the Masira, but we have Edei Masira, those ones that are Chatum there. Okay. So here, go on. Yeah, let's read on a little bit more.
Dat Rashi ve'Tosfot ve'Rosh ve'Maor ve'Rabbeinu Ephraim Talmid Harif ve'Smag ve'Sefra Truma ve'Mordechai de below Edei Mesira lav klumhu ve'rak Edei Mesira karte ve'lo Edei Chatima. All right, so they're paskening per like the just very basic understanding of Rabbi Elazar. So
we have a machloket basically whether you need Edei Mesira, and we have many poskim can say you need Edei Mesira.
Exactly. And
wait, but who are all those people he quoted before? The Rambam and the Ran. What were they saying?
They were saying that everyone agrees that Edei Chatima is enough. So and you don't need
in other words, we have two large groups of poskim that hold differently. Okay, go ahead.
V'zesheti ken Rabban Gamliel, hu dekevan shaget yotzeh mitachet yada beidei chatima, ve'edim mekuyamim, bevadai nimsar la kedat beidei mesira. Right. So Rabban Gamliel says you got to sign the thing, the actual document, and then and since it left went into her hand with these witnesses, right? And the Eidim are still around. We can check for sure. It was given properly with Eidei Mesira. We can assume that Eidei Mesira existed.
Mm-hmm.
All right, which is a little bit
In
similar.
other words, it's similar but very different actually, because
Yeah.
it's saying not that the chatimot are the signature, are the Eidei Mesira. It's that if you went to all this trouble of having Eidei Chatima and writing this whole document, and now we see it's in her hands, we can assume it was done kedat. It's kind of like what kind of something Rav Moshe talked about in that tshuva we saw a while ago, which is that if we know the rabbi is a basic principle in halacha, which is that if you know the rabbi was generally a halachic observant rabbi, then anything he does, you assume followed the halacha. If there's a mikveh, I heard a story like this, a case like this. You come to a town and there's a mikveh, and you don't know whether it was built according to the halacha or not, because it could be it's not kosher because of how it was built. But if you know that the person who was there before you, the rabbi previous to you, was a halachically careful person, then you assume he did it correctly. Yet you have no witnesses about how it was built. So the same thing here. If everything else looks good, he's got signatories, and we know she's got it now, so we assume that there were witnesses at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Vadarabba Hosiful, as I was, Vadarabba Hosiful Amar Dafiul Rabbi Meir Desfirle de Eidei Chatima Karte. Mikomakom Sarich Limsor La Bifnei Shnei Edim De Ein Davar Shebe'erva Pachot Mishnayim. Right. So if it was like the flip here, now Rabbi Meir, we say he thinks, Eidei Chatima work, but as long as there's also Eidei Mesira, you need both, according to Rabbi Meir in this version, in this Rashi Tosfot school, and not just one. So. In
other words, it's obvious that you always have Eidei Mesira. You have to have Eidei Mesira, and he's just saying that you also have to have the Eidei Chatima. Okay.
Now I think he gets into the actual the maskana here. Vekevan de'ave plugta de Rav Ravavata mimela de ladina yeshlach mir bekechol adayot. So now we got to be yotzei lechol adayot because we have the machlok just like we had before of some of the rabbis here. Ulechadchila shavin gam ken kol adayot deba'ina Eidei Mesira ve'Eidei Chatima. Right, but everyone seems to agree at the end of the day that you need both Eidim on the Chatima and Eidei Mesira. V'chein nahagu bechol tfutzot Yisrael. So everywhere where Jews live, that's how we practice. So ukvar nitbar b'siman kuf lamed delachadchila lochin katachad shel Eidim shiyu hem Eidei Chatima ve'Eidei HaMesira v'lo shnei kitot. So you just get two Eidim, not four Eidim, and they act as both. Is the way we usually do it. It's a good Hilchot Gitin here. Mipnei chashash de davar velo chatzi davar, and so it's because of the word says he finds in her is it ervat davar? Is that where we get it from? I think, and therefore it has to be. They have to see the whole matter, not just some of them saw the chatima, some of them saw the mesira, but they have to see the whole thing.
Davar v'chetzi davar means we want to make sure we don't know what the davar is here, and maybe the davar is the whole process. So we don't want witnesses that watched only a half of the process are invalid. And maybe it's two processes, or maybe it's one long. And if it's one long process, then we'd rather have two witnesses just to be only two, and not four, to be sure that we have witnesses that watch the whole thing. Great, excellent. So we saw a couple of things here. We see that there are actually poskim that obviously, ideally, we're going to have both types of signatories, but there are poskim that say either one could be sufficient. So that's going to cause that's going to be a point of interest for like Safek Kiddushin, and obviously in Gittin you could have Safek Gittin. That's very dangerous. You'd have to, but in Kiddushin it's less dangerous. But you have to do it over again. But the point is you have Safek Kiddushin if you have just one of these things. If you have just one type of signatories. All right, let's take a break here. And we'll come back and look at the Shulchan Aruch. Actually, I want to go to the tour again and read Bet. Maybe Josh, you want to read Bet?
Wait,
We're in the
about the
tour.
last discussion, when
Yeah.
we were learning, Masha had an interesting point about why it might not make sense in this particular case to be learning from Gilshin to Nisuin. I was wondering if you wanted to hear it.
I was just thanks, Stephanie, thinking about this, that the being a case in which we don't need to have the woman's participation in the receipt of and the acknowledgement. So a question of data or not data. It's strange to learn a case where presumably we need her consent from one that we don't need her consent. That is from Gilshin, in which there is pretty much a unilateral a legal act to Kiddushin, where there's clearly, at least from the onset, a presumed bilateral consent necessary for it to be valid. Is that what you were referring to, Yavin?
Yeah, and also about the question about witnessing, but yeah, that's even more,
Yeah, you definitely need consent. Thank you. But let's look at Bet. What did I? Oh, Josh.
Me.
Yeah.
We're in the tour, right?
Yeah. In the tour. Yeah.
וכתב עוד, אף על פי שהשטר פסול לקדש בו, שמין הנייר, אם יש בו שווה פרוטה מקודשת, ואם אין בו שווה פרוטה, הרי ספק קידושין. So it's still the Rama with hay. That even if it's pasul, for whatever reason, you evaluate the material used for the shtar, and if it's shaveh puta, then it's kiddushin. If not, then we go according to the usual rule of safek kiddushin.
All right. Look at the Beit Yosef.
מה שכתב רבינו בשם העולמה, אף על פי שהשטר פסול לקדש בו שמין הנייר וכולו. גם רבינו ירוחם, כך כתב בשמו. Shall we read the בדק הבית?
No, skip that. ויש להסתפק.
ויש להסתפק בפירוש דבריו, דכיוון דלא קידשה בשטר הזה לשם כסף, אפילו שווה פרוטה אינה מקודשת, ולא בא להכשיר, אלא כשרוצה לקדשה בו משום כסף.
In other words, maybe the Gemara, or and Rabbeinu Yerucham, and the Ramah, and the Gemara were saying it only works if it's kesef because they were also thinking to marry with kesef, but not the normal case.
Right.
Go on.
והכי כמר, אף על פי ששטר זה שכתבו שלא מדעתה פסול לקדש בו תורת שטר, אם בא לקדשה בו משום כסף, שמן את הנייר, אם יש בו שווה פרוטה מקודשת. כלומר, יכול לקדשה בו בתורת כסף. I don't know which is the Rabbeinu Yerucham, which is the Beit Yosef coming in, but he's saying there has to be an intention there, and you can switch intentions afterwards. We have to say which intention you have.
Right. You have to at least have that intention.
ואם אין בו שווה פרוטה וקידשה בו, הרי ספק קידושים משום דחיישינן שמא שווה פרוטה במדי.
Oh, now I brought that in again. So even if it's not Shaveh Pruta, it's still Safek Kiddushin.
Right.
Okay. That's what I was mentioning before also. Okay.
ואפשר דאפילו בקידשה בו בתורת שטר, כאמר, ואם יש בו שווה פרוטה מקודשת מתורת כסף. וזה נראה יותר מדקדוק הלשון. So it could be that even if the intention is to do it by means of a shtar,
like we originally thought, like we originally understood the Gemara. And that's near yoter.
It could be that you, by saying, or by giving the shtar, you're also saying that it's also b'torat kesef if you need it to be.
Right.
that-
Yeah. Well, that's what you're saying, that he has that in mind also. Because you're answering a question, which is, well, why is that? Why is that? And you're saying maybe because you always have it in mind that if it's possible, then I meant this also. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
I gave my answer that you need to give a thing of value. But okay. So what do we see here? We see that Yerbeinu Yerucham and also Yerbeinu Yerucham brings the Ramah, who holds that, like the Gemara. I don't exactly understand what the Ramah's Chiddush is. It seems to be just saying the Gemara. Sarah?
I'm not going to answer that question, so if somebody else doesn't answer that question, I should speak up first.
It's okay. Just a question.
Yeah, I was just interested in the fact that they don't seem to be worried about whether she thinks it's Kesef or Shtar, because it seems like if she's going to accept it, then she needs to know which one it is, maybe. I mean, at least some of the stuff we saw in the previous couple of Simanim about like she needs to know how much it's worth and stuff like that. Seems like it might suggest that would be a problem, but it doesn't. At least I didn't see anyone raising that issue.
I did see someone talk about it. I don't remember where now, but we say the ring. When you get married in a normal case, you don't say "Harei at mekudeshet li b'torat b'tabat zut b'torat kesef." You just say b'tabat zut. And so too with the shtar. You're saying pretty much the same language. Harei at mekudeshet li b'shtar zut. What is it? So you didn't have to explicitly say to the Kala, you're saying, but you're asking, what about her mind? Her mind is that she's accepting this item so that she should be married in whatever way it is. And so too, when the man says it, he's saying, I'm giving you this thing and then we're getting married. He never says exactly what type of Kiddushin process he's enacting. It's the action speaks louder than words. But the action maybe has in it multiple things.
Right. I mean, I guess that the thought would be like with Kesef, if he hands her a ring, there's only one thing that could possibly be.
But he didn't.
And with Shtar, there's some ambiguity. And then maybe that ambiguity needs to be resolved somehow for her. Or maybe we just say she has the same sort of thing where she says, oh, I'm going to assume it's Shtar until it's not. Right, or there is some sort of inherent element of Kesef built into Shtar. And
no, what I'm saying is maybe her and his dot is much more general, and maybe they're just saying they're not specifying by what mechanism this is working. They're just saying we're getting married that's my point, that we don't specify in words what mechanism is going on here. And therefore the dot is really just we're getting married by a method that works. We're not Talmidei Chachamim. We just think that if you give a ring, that we think that we're getting married now. In other words, there's a general kavana that by handing you this, I am marrying you, and I'm accepting this, and being married. And I don't know whether this is called kesef or a shtar, but it's happening now.
That's
I mean, the only thing I go ahead, Yavini.
No, just to reinforce, like that's fine for that last opinion, that it's okay, it all counts, but it works less well for the first opinion, for the first question where we said like, oh no, it has to have been like in his mind to do it by Kesef.
You can't make me explain.
You
can't make me say a sentence that fits both opinions. I mean, they're different opinions. Yeah, I'm explaining the second point. You're right.
No, but right.
Yeah. What made me worry about this was all of the stuff that we've seen about like, oh, well, she wouldn't be willing to accept X or Y for Kiddushin, because obviously that's too, it's not good enough. It's not enough. It's not valuable enough. And And in those cases, it's right. And even women who are sort of like makbidot to only accept, some large amount as part of the kesef. And so you might think that she'd be willing to do it with shtar, but
that's my
there's
point.
something
Shtar
like
is a kind of
aesthetically
kesef.
disturbing about saying she's going to get married with kesef, but it's, but the value is the value of a piece of paper. That seems like it's like, I don't know, kind of less, that like might feel devaluing in some way. I don't know. Just because the piece of paper is probably not worth very much, but maybe I have a modern sense about paper that is not actually,
I think, paper is probably worth
appropriate
more.
to the context.
No, but anyway, it has to be just a pruta. It's not very much. It's kind of insulting in any case that we only require a pruta.
Yeah, or like charas is like really, I mean, right. So maybe that's just insulting in any case, but it seems like if she thinks like, oh, I'm only going to get married with something that's a ring that's worth 50, and then it turns out to be worth 40, that's a problem potentially.
Yeah, but she sees that it's a piece of paper and she knows that she's accepting that.
Right. So
I
guess maybe
she's not thinking she's getting married with a diamond ring when she gets a piece of paper. But if you give her a glass ring, she might think, and she thinks it's a diamond ring, then there's a mistake going on.
Right. There's like a big value difference. Yeah. And I guess the shtar, like
the shtar, essentially, she's willing to get married with no monetary value. So certainly a pruta.
It could be, if it's shelo midata, so the shtar is invalid as a shtar, but as soon as she takes it into her hands, then it's a kind of a kesef kind of exchange, and accepting it in her hands is the acceptance of the kiddushin.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. That's a very interesting point. That's a very interesting way of looking at it. That her acceptance, even, you're saying she almost knows that it's possible because she knows it wasn't written l'datar, and so because of that, which she would know that, and yet she accepts it, so she must be accepting it as kesef. That's an interesting way of looking at it.
I don't think we have to. I don't know what the normative level of like how much we're expecting her to know specifically about like the halachot of the shtar or not. But I feel like it's kind of like either way, as we were just saying, that I think it's like whether or not she thinks it's a shtar or whether she thinks she's just getting paper, either way, she knows Lamaisa she's just getting paper. Right. Like, and again, it's like, it's not like she like thinks she's getting a fancy ring and she's getting like a little ring pop. Like, she knows she's getting paper one way or another, that like, so if she's fine with there not being like such a significant material exchange.
All right, let's read the Beit Yosef Gimel Daled. Josh. We don't have a tour on this.
Got it. בגמרא שם, גרסינן, בגמרא שם, בשטר כיצד כתב לה על הנייר או על החרס, אף על פי שאין בו שבפרוטה, בתך מקודשת לי, בין על ידי אביה, בין על ידי עצמה. מקודשת.
You can go on.
וכתב הרשב"א בתשובה על זה, דילמה בכותב בתך פלונית, היא
I think Lo Kol Shekain Talmud Lomar. I'm not sure. I don't know. It fits. Lo Kol Shekain Talmud Lomar. I don't know. It doesn't quite fit.
ואף להזכרת השם הוקשו הוויה ליציאה.
So in other words, what he's pointing out here is that you actually should write the name of the person, of the woman. Just like in a get, you need to have the names of the people. So too in a shtar, you should have the names of the people. This is going back to what I was saying before. How many things do we compare to the gittin? If it's Havayrish, the Yitzhak should have the name. וכן היא כותבה,
כן הוא בתשובה אצלי עד כמה שנה. He also read this in another תשובה.
right, let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So on Aleph, so wait a second, Al Cheres. So actually, we didn't see everything I wanted to see in the. If you look, I'm going to look for a minute at the Beit Shmuel Al Cheres. This is a very interesting little Beit Shmuel here. It's short, but it has a lot in it. He says like this. Al Cheres. You write on this clay piece, and we're a little bit bothered by writing on clay. Hu davar sheyachol lizdayef. It's a thing that can be forged. In other words, you can scrape off the letters that you wrote on it and write something else, or scrape off one letter. It's not like paper, where you can scrape it off, but you'll see a smudge, or leather. You'll see something smudged there. Of course, we're writing with ink. This is also an important point. If it's not written here, you have to write in ink. It has to be writing with something that leaves a permanent mark, because we're worried that that people will change the document after the event. If you change the document after the event, then you can we don't know what happened. We want it to be a document that can't be changed. But what about this? How can you write it on cheres? Kotvim alav kishemose lifnei edim edei mesira dafka. He says, but it's not a problem really, because you're doing this writing when you have in front of the edei mesira, and so even if the document is lost afterward, it's irrelevant. We have witnesses of what happened. So we don't really care that you could lizayef this document, you could forge it, you could corrupt it, because we have actual witnesses watching the event. This is all well and good only if they did not have edei chatima. But if you had edei chatima, then we have a gezerah. Chayshinan shema yavol smoke al edei chatima. We have a fear that you will rely on edei chatima and not have edei masira. And then, in other words, if you're using a cheres and you have people sign on it edei chatima, then it actually does more harm than good, because now we're worried that you'll rely on those edei chatima, won't have a masira, and since the document itself is a thing that can be forged, maybe it'll get changed. So he's giving a sort of a rule that if you use cheres, you cannot have signatories on it, because we're worried that you'll have signatories, and then because we saw in our Chashofan that you're at least suffix married if you don't have edei masira, and here you have edei chatima. Maybe you're going to rely on this document without edei chatima, and then without edei masira, and then you could change the name of the person that you're getting married to or something. You could erase it. Say, I wasn't really married. Okay. Any questions on that? I mean, you may not have gotten all that when you read it. Now he says in bet, but notnim la bifnei edim. You could give it in front of edim. Lakaman siman kuf lamed gimel. Gabe get katav de'im chatmu ala get edei chatima umosro beino leveina kasher. So this is talking about gittin, and he's bringing it in here because it's relevant to marriage with a shtar. That we're talking now again about not cheres but on niyar, paper. That if you have the chatimot, chatmo alaget edei chatima, you have these witnesses that signed that he wrote this document. Then he gives it to her privately. It's kosher. Well, that's kind of like what we saw, that you don't need edei masira. V'yesh omrim pasul, and there are those that say that's pasul upluk zu shayach hakagam came to kiddushin. And the same rule is going to apply here. So it's going to be a suffix if you give it to her privately with but you have Edei Chatima. Is he going to talk about? Let's go another one. Here on Gimel, L'Shem Ha'isha. It has to be written for the woman. Ayin b'shilte giburim, reish taf reish kaf hey. Titzarich liktov Shem Iro. You need to write also the name of the city this is taking place. V'Shem Ira and his or his city and her city where they're from. Kamo get, of this town. Ve'ein tzarich lomar harei at mikudeshet li. And this is what we were talking about before. You don't need to say harei at mikudeshet li, ela omer harei ze likudushech. This is for marriage, because it's written in the document already. Which is, we talked about that before. You could say it either way. You could say no, just like a ring, you have to say harei at. But maybe by the ring, you have to make it clear what you're doing. Here, you don't have to make it clear because it's in the document.
I mean, you're still making it clear by saying "Harei ze lekiddushech," right?
That's also true. Is there what you're asking? So what's the difference?
What's the difference? Yeah.
I would like to ask if this is any kind of proof that about the literacy of women in general in this time, because the fact that he can give her a document and say something and not necessarily have that be what he actually repeats verbally could be really big grounds for
saying that women could read,
or for saying that women otherwise would be very much deceived in their contractual obligations if they were accepting documents without knowing their content.
I mean, they were just clicking on I've read the above documents and I agree. I don't see, but you're saying, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that she did know how to read or she didn't know how to read?
I'm saying that it seems like the women would know how to read if this is an argument that you could not repeat exactly what is being said, read her aloud what is being said in the document in front of witnesses.
In other words, we're saying you don't have to read it to her. You could read it to her. You're not required to read it to her because she could read it herself.
That is a question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you could prove either way whether they could read. I mean, she probably knows what's going on here anyway. And there's not much to it, this document. It doesn't have any stipulation necessarily. I mean, it could. I mean, it had to, that's a good question. If it had,
she may be literate, or her brothers may. There's a lot. In other words, there's literacy around, and she may be literate, or she may have access to literate people, as opposed to some town. I'm saying this of non-Jewish peasants where no one can read it. No one can understand what's happening. So it's intriguing. It's really intriguing.
Let's read Bet in the Shulchan Aruch. Josh, you want to read Bet?
אף על פי שהשטר פסול לקדש בו, שמין את הנייר, אם יש בו שווה פרוטה מקודשת, ואם לאו, הרי זו ספק מקודשת.
That's like what we saw. Look at the Chelkat Mechokek Dalet.
כלומר, אפילו בכתבו שלא לשמה, ונתנו לה בתורת שטר, שהוא פסול, מכל מקום שמים הנייר, ולא אמרו פסול אלא באומר בפירוש.
בפירוש שאין מקדשה בתורת כסף, אף שיהיה הנייר שווה הרבה. In other words, it's only pasul if he actually says, I'm not marrying you with money, only with the document. If he makes it clear that he's not trying to do it with kesef, as long as it's unclear, then we assume it's by any means possible. But if he says specifically, I'm not marrying you by kesef, then of course it'll be pasul.
It's a bit like in the Beit Yosef, where it seems the unspoken assumption is that Kiddushei Kesef is included in the giving of the shtar.
Yeah, it's like the Beit Yosef, but he's just making it even sharper point by saying you'd have to actually say, I'm not doing
You
it.
have a negative kavanah.
You have to have negative kavanah to uproot that. Okay. Read Gimel.
אם היא קטנה או נערה, ומקדשה על ידי אביה בשטר, כותב, ביתך מקודשת לי.
Well, that's sort of obvious. If you're giving it to the father, then you have to write different. You have to write bitech. Then מקודשת לי. You read Dalet.
יש מי שאומר שצריך שיזכיר שמות האיש והאישה בשטר קידושין, כשם שצריך להזכירם בגט. So there's the opinion that you need the actual names, just like in the get.
Correct. Go on.
And that's the Rashba. כתבו על דבר המחובר לקרקע, או על איסורי הנאה, יש אומרים שהוא פסול. Okay?
Right.
So if it was written on something that was attached to the ground, or things which are forbidden to derive benefit. I'm assuming this is all from Hilchot Gittin.
This is all from Gittin, exactly.
יש אומרים שהוא פסול ויש מכשירים.
Just a second. I want to see something. Okay, so yeah, so again, I mentioned that before, that if it's Isser Hana'ah, maybe the star has no value, so you can't do it. V'yesh omrim shu pasul. Okay, read, go on.
ויש אומרים שהוא פסול ויש מכשירים.
ויש מכשירים.
ואין צריך לכתוב זמן בשטר קידושין. You see,
unlike Gittin.
Unlike Gittin, right? Doesn't need the
right. Because by Gittin, you have to write the star because you have to write the time, because if you don't write the time, if she knows that if he knows or she knows that there's not going to be a time written on it, then there could be pritsut. They could do stuff before the get and say they did it after. In other words, there has to be a time written on it so that we know exactly at what moment the wedding ended, the marriage ended. But there's no nafkamina by Kiddushin for that. So that logic doesn't apply to a Kiddushin. All right, now the next part is what's interesting to me.
כתבו בכתב ידו, ואין עליו עד, מקודשת מספק. It was written by hand, or he wrote it by hand, and there was no witness, מקודשת מספק.
Now this means that he gave it to her with no witnesses at all, neither in the document nor witnesses of Masira. Because if there be witness of Masira, then obviously it works. There's no witnesses at all. That's what we're talking about here. And we're going to get back to it in a second. Just let's finish the Ramah.
נתן לה שטר ואמר לה, על מנת שהנייר שלי אינה מקודשת.
Right. This is what I was mentioning also before. If he says, if I want to keep the paper myself, it's Eino Mikudeshet. And this is what I was trying to use also as this idea that you see that there's some essence, there's a shtickle kesef in Kiddushay Shtar. She's got to get the item. It's Kiddushay. It's not called getting the item. It's not called giving a person a star. You have to give them a star. It means it has to be their star. That's part of the idea of Kiddushay Shtar. It's not only the writing of the star, it's the star. And therefore, if you send her an email, it's not called a star. She has to get it, and you can't say it's going to come back to me. No,
is that a general halacha in all shtarot also? If you have a business transaction and you sell some land and you say al manat shashtar sheli.
I don't think so. I don't know. I do not know these laws, but I think this is I think it's particularly appertains to marriage with a star, because I mean, I'm not, it's a good question. I think it's particularly here. I don't really know. But let's go back, and we have some time, which is good. So I want to look at, I don't know, let's look at the Chelkat Machokek in Chet. Maybe Sarah, you want to read?
Sure, hold on one second.
And then I want to read Tet in the Shbeit Shmuel.
Sorry, I somehow got myself on the wrong page. Okay. Okay, ve'ein alav ad mekudeshet misafek.
Ve'ein alav eid mekudeshet misafek. Where are we talking about? This is Katav Yado. I want to.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, I asked a lawyer recently, how can you write a will in Israel? And he said there are actually like 5 ways you can do it. One is you go to a notary, and you notarize it, which is kind of like witnesses. Or one is that you actually have 2 witnesses. You don't go to a notary, but you have 2 witnesses and they sign it. One is that you go to a judge, and but one of them, maybe there's only 4, but maybe there's 5. One of them is that you write it as a katav yado. In other words, you don't have any witness. In other words, somebody, you can think, why would somebody want to do that? Just go to a notary. But maybe somebody doesn't want anybody to know what his will is going to be. So he doesn't want to embarrass anybody. I don't know. So you can write a will in Israel, katav yado, and then your own writing itself is like the notary, because your tav yad is identifiable to you. Your handwriting is identifiable to you. So it's as though you have witnesses of the writing. Your writing itself is its own witness to itself. And I had that in the back of my mind when I read this halacha. So that's the introduction. So look at this Chelkat Machokek.
Hainu lemanza sfira de get velo ede mesira sagi be'ede chatima.
Oh, this is only according to that opinion that says all you need is Eidei Chatima, because that signing itself is like Eidei Chatima. Go ahead.
But for just in other legal, like in other areas of halacha, can you write a document and not have, like, you can't write a get that way, can you?
No, you definitely can. Well, that's what I wanted to say. You definitely can.
You can write a get that way.
Get for sure, because katavla. In other words, midoraita.
Okay.
Midoraita, if you just katavla, if a man is katavla, he writes it for her, it has to work. It works.
But here we're being, at least on this interpretation, right, where we're saying, oh, this is only the people who want it, who think that we all, I see.
Well,
fine,
maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe. So you're saying katavla applies. I understand. No, you're saying, yeah. The other opinions would say is everybody agrees that we connect Gittin to.
Right.
But maybe katavla we don't connect. That's what I say. There's a whole tension going on in this whole sugya of how many things do we say are identical to Gittin and how many are not. And it's not clear. There's no Gemara that says exactly whether handwritten, works or not. By Gittin, for sure it works. But remember, we said also by Gittin you should write the time. Well, that's a rabbinic law. But anyway, okay. Here it's only according to those that say you need a day. You're asking a good question. You're saying, why doesn't everybody say it? Because it's katavla. Just go back. Maybe they don't hold. So maybe they don't hold the yatsa v'haisa applies to this
particular issue, right?
Right.
But I think because he's saying dispirale to get the low ede mesira sage be'ede chatima, then it shouldn't be that you have to. It doesn't have to be that we're saying, oh, the people who not in that camp are just holding off on applying this law from Gittin to to Kiddushin. It's just that they think that the Chalkat ben Chalkek is only saying that because he's just like there's
Right. He didn't mention anything about Yatsa B'Haisa. He
yeah,
seems to be just
right.
saying,
He's not saying that at all.
he's just
and
saying, like I
he
was
doesn't
saying,
need to.
that
Yeah.
Katav Yado is like Chatima. So logically, if you hold Chatima works, then
Then it should
Katav
be
Yado
fine.
works. Katav Yado works. And if you don't hold Chatima, then Katav Yado wouldn't work. Very logical. All right, so go on. Starting. Hainu Laman the sphere le de get below de Mesira Sagi be'ede Chatima. Right. So you see, but I just want to point out, you see that there's for sure no Ede Mesira here. If there be Ede Mesira here, then it's just Pshita that works.
Right. Everybody seems right.
Right.
Gam kan ktav yado k'me ede chatima dame.
Oh,
Aval leman.
right,
so-
his handwriting is like 100 witnesses.
Yeah. Aval leman debai ede mesira davka uve ede chatima lechude einu get klal. Shnei hadeot ha'elu huvu lakaman v'siman such and such. Umuteret lachzor labala kohen gam b'kiddushin ein kan kiddushin klal. The answer is good.
You're just saying something. He's saying that this is a machlokas. What did the Ramah say? He says, Katvo b'ktav yado ve'en alav ede mikudeshet misafek. Misafek.
Misafek, yeah.
Yeah, we're just explaining it. Misafek. All right, let's look at the. I'm not sure if we're going to add too much, but let's look at the Beit Shmuel Tet. I think it's an interesting law. You can do. It's kind of like a primitive Torah law. Going back, you can write Tav Yado, no witnesses, nothing. It works. So look at so actually Yavni. I don't think Yavni read that much. Maybe you want to read
Sure.
10.
ואין עליו עד, sorry,
Nimuke Yosef,
בנימוקי יוסף פרק
Daled.
ד'
Oh, Perik.
א',
Oh,
whatever
maybe it's not
it is.
Daled.
הביא פלוגתא, זה כאילו, הביא פלוגתא בקידושין, אם כתב בכתב יד, דקיימלן בגיטין כשר מדאורייתא, אם אמרינן, רגע, אם אמרינן בקידושין גם כן, אם אמרינן בקידושין גם כן, והיא מקודשת מדאורייתא, או דילמה דווקא גט שכתוב וכתב לה, הרי כתב לה, אבל בקידושין.
He's saying out everything that I just said. He's saying it out much more clearly. In other words, he's later, so he's clear. So he's saying we have this thing, katav la, so that's for sure going to work the right thing. Aval b'kiddushin.
Sorry, והרי כתב לה, אבל בקידושין יש לומר, אין דבר שבערווה פחות משניים.
You always need two witnesses for anything involving erva, and in fact, this is katav la by gittin is an exception.
ויש כתבו בגיטין גם כן, אמרינן אין דבר גם כן אמרינן אין דבר שבערווה פחות משניים, ורחמנה הכשיר בכתב יד משום דחשוב כאילו היה שניים חתומים עליו. ואם כן בקידושין גם כן כשר.
Oh, so you're saying, let's look at the logic. Yes, you're 100% right. You need two witnesses always. But if in Gittin, you need two witnesses too. But Ktav Yado is like 100 witnesses. So then we have two witnesses. So then we have two witnesses also in Kiddushin. So it should work.
Yeah.
It's not an exception. It's a principle.
ובסימן קל"ג שם מבואר פלוגתא בגט עם איקה עדי חתימה בלא עדי המסירה.
You have עדי חתימה without עדי מסירה.
וכמה פוסקים.
וכמה פוסקים הגט בטל.
הגט בטל.
In other words, you need to have Edi Masira. And wait a second. Just because you have 100 witnesses here doesn't mean you have Edi Masira.
Right. אם כן בקידושין, נמי. אם לקה עדי מסירה, הקידושין בטלים, ואם איקה עדי מסירה, ולקה עדי חתימה, כשר מדאורייתא.
Right, for sure it's kasher midoraita now, but if with Ede Masira, but if you don't have Ede Masira, then it shouldn't work.
Yeah, that was what we said about, yeah.
Right.
והפלוגתא הנ"ל בנימוקי יוסף, על כן, אליבא דמאן דאמר עדי חתימה בלא עדי מסירה מהנה. So the statement of the Nimukei Yosef was specifically for those who hold that it's Edi Chatima that matters.
In other words, that's exactly what the Chelkat Machokek said. In other words, it comes out only good according to those who hold you only need Edi Chatima.
Yeah. דאם לא כן, קשה ממאי נפקא אם
No, I think Mineu Mimai Nafka.
ממה נפשך.
Mima Nafshach, thank you.
ממה נפשך אם לקה עדי מסירה, אפילו אם כתב יד הווה כעדי חתימה, מכל מקום הגט והקידושין בטל.
The imloke, go back. The imloke and kasha mimanavshach. It's a kasha. It's not going to make sense if you don't say it like we just said. Im leka ede masira, im kain afilu im ketav yado have ke ede chatima mekom makom aget v'kedushin batel, because you need ede masira. V'im ika ede masira im kain lama kedushin batelin al karchach atya lemanda amer ede chatima below ede masira kasha. Let's go on. Just go on.
Okay. אם כן, לדידן, אם לקה עדי מסירה, הווה קידושי ספק, בלא פלוגתא, שהביא הנימוקי יוסף, אלא מספק עם עדי חתימה מהנה, בלא עדי מסירה. לפי זה הווה בספק ספקה להתיר אחד עם עדי חתימה מהנה, בלא עדי מסירה, ואם תרצו לומר, דמהנה ספק עם כתב יד, דמהנה ספק עם כתב יד, הווה כעדי חתימה.
What does he mean lahat here? Wait a second. Is he talking about gittin here? All right, let's go back. Wait. For the fees, have a fake lahat here. Echad im ede chatima mahane below ede masira. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, there's only some poskim that hold ede chatima works without ede masira. V'im timsalo for mahane, and even if you do say it's mahane, these ede safek im ktav yado have ede chatima. Who says that this signature, that signing, that writing yourself is counts as witnesses? So therefore, it should not work, right? Therefore, the document should not work, and she should not be married. True? Ve'im ba shtar kiddushin lefanenu katuv b'ktav yado.
Yeah.
Was it Aleph? What's Aleph Yud? No. Not sure.
Ve'en yadua?
Ve'eno yadua, thank you. Ve'eno yadua im hayasham ede masira. We don't know. Katabti the comments in Kuf Lamed. Kol kehai gavna lo amrinan bivadai haya. We don't say there were for sure ede masira. V'gam lo amrinan bivadai lo haya ede masira. V'kedushin pesulid midirabanan ad niparer shahayasham ede masira. In other words, it's puzzled totally because of this fake. right? He's saying it's puzzled totally because of this fake seka. But you should know, the Aruch HaShulchan does not like this fake seka. If I can find it quickly, we're out of time here. Yeah. He says like this, V'li nira de'ein zes fake sveka. The lo dami the kola fake sveka. It's not like other fake sveka. Shasafek hu be'ikar amase. Shema haya ken o ken o ken. Whether it was like this or like that. Beam tim salovar ken shema gam biki hay gavne kasher. Aval hacha. In other words, first of all, we don't know if it was like this or like that. Is a normal suffix. And then even if it was like that, even like that, it would be, even in that way, it would be kosher. Aval hacha mase mivoreret etzleinu vasvekat hem aladin. But here we know what happened. We just don't know the din. Ve'im ken kishabanu ladun al zeh ha'isha havechad safek imi penuya o eshet ish. We just really have one suffix. Is she married or not? It's very complicated, the rules of fake seka, and I don't pretend to understand them. There's like in Yeridea, Lexi, you may remember this, like I remember it's the Shach of the Taz. At the end there, he writes like
The Shach. He writes like very thoroughly.
Yes, he goes through like 25 pages of explanations of the laws of fake seka. And if I always like to think fake seka is like one concept, but it's not. It's very complicated. So he says like this. It's really just one suffix. Is she married or not? Umali suffix ze bao suffix ze v'habe kesfek sveka mishem echad. V'lechen ha'ikar k'Rabbeinu Rama d'zeu suffix kedusha. So he says he just argues on the Beit Shmuel without understanding exactly why. But he says it's really one suffix. It's really just one suffix. Is she married or not? And he rejects this line of thinking here of the Beit Shmuel, and he says the halacha is that Tav Yado is a suffix. She's suffix kiddushin, and therefore you need to get. Okay. Anyone want to make a comment?
That's very troubling.
Yeah. Why? Why is it very troubling?
I think if we understand that the Idei Chatima are witnessing his will in the matter, and the Idei Mesira are witnessing her will in accepting the matter, then the minute we eliminate the need for one set of witnesses or the actual part of the Mesira, then we're eliminating her consent entirely from the transmission of the document. That is,
well, we discussed this before. Before you even mentioned Beit Shmuel and the Aruch HaShulchan, you have we discussed this question about what was the machlokus between Rav Elazar and Rabbi Meir, and maybe everybody agrees that Eidei Chatima is enough. So over there, you're having a question. That's troubling to you.
I'm saying the whole idea of getting rid of the Mesira in the context of Kiddushin is troubling.
We're not getting rid of it. We're just getting rid of, we don't have witnesses to it.
Right, but that means that the whatever proof it is one party's side of what has happened.
Well, you're asking interesting. I assume the case is that they both agree. In other words, this is the case, I think, that he wrote it, he handed it to her, and now they say they're married. And we say, well, wait a second, there are no witnesses. Are they married? And they say, well, I have, we don't need witnesses. Do we need witnesses? They both agree. Or you're bringing up a different case, kind of, where she's saying, I never got that document. And he's saying, I gave her this document. Well, you can't prove that. I don't think, first of all, I don't think in such a case we would say that for sure we believe him. I don't see why we would believe him.
But if we think that the Eidei Chatima, that if it has to be written midata, then the Edei Chatima are not only testifying to his will, they're also testifying at least to her knowledge of what's going on, at minimum and maximum, some kind of consent. So I'm not saying that solves every problem, but it seems like it's
You say if we have
a little better.
Well, I don't understand. What are you trying to say? I don't understand.
I'm trying to say, well, Masha seems to be saying, if I understand her correctly, that the worry is something like, if we have Edei Chatima, the Edei Chatima can testify to like that he wanted to do it, right? Or to his sort of participation in the thing. And that the Edei Mesira testify to the process of her accepting it, right? So they could testify to like, I don't know, that she didn't throw it back in his face or whatever. And that if you get rid of that, the Edei Mesira, then you've kind of taken out any meaningful testimony about her will in this scenario. That seems to be the kasha. Is that right, Masha?
That is the kasha, and then it's compounded by the fact that we're accepting a document that's handwritten by him and getting rid of the Edei Chatima on top of that, and saying a document that is handwritten by him is sufficient proof of his and her consent to the matter. That takes the problem like one step further in where is the external checking and balancing of this contract.
Yeah, so maybe mine doesn't solve the version where my thought doesn't solve the version where it's Katav Yado, but at least in a version where he has witnesses signing it, it seems like.
But assuming we hold that like that was a machloket also, that it needs to be.
Yeah, assuming you hold that it should be midata, then that's kind of where that goes, right? That's where the kind of testifying to her side of the story goes. Now, maybe
you say the Edei Chatima are also testifying about her, because they're theoretically testifying that she knew about this.
But that's only one opinion.
Right.
I mean, again, like assuming we're on that side of the, we were like in the correct part of the little binary tree, right? That might help. It doesn't seem to solve.
Well, again, no, well, you're not. What about what I said? That we're only talking about a case where they both agree that this happened. We're not talking about a dispute. We're talking about a case where a woman and a man come and say, he hand wrote this document and gave it to me.
But then that's not the case that we're concerned about. Like the
that
case
is,
where
of course
it is if we have the opinion that
no, they come and they say that, and they say, but we don't need a get because there was no witnesses. Comes along the Raman, says, no, you need a get. He gave me this document to marry me, and we thought it was great. But now my father is upset that I married this man, and my father said, there was no witnesses to it, so you're not really married. You're not a divorcee. You'll find a shidduch, no problem, because you're not, you never were married. We're going to annul the marriage. It was never really a marriage. Comes along the Raman and says, no. If everybody knows, the facts are the facts. We know that that he handed it to her. We just don't know that we know that he handed it to her and there were no witnesses. And we know that he hand wrote it. Says the Chelkat Machokek, well, there's a double suffix here. Because first of all, maybe you need Edei Mesira. You have to have them. And secondly, maybe Ktav Yado is not Edei Chatima at all. Even if you say that you need only Edei Chatima, maybe we don't have that either. So we don't have any witnesses at all. So we can nullify the marriage, and it's like she was never married. Says
but Masha's raising a concern about a case, about like how this legal structure affects various cases, and saying there are other cases that aren't of concern that it also affects.
I don't believe that in a case where the man says, I married her and now I refuse to divorce her and she's an aguna because of this document here, and I married her, and she says, I never got that document. There's no such, and there's no witnesses. I don't think we're going to believe him just because he has a document that says Hare Kudeshet Li in his handwriting. That would be absurd. Nobody says that.
But what if I think there's like a finer grained case where it's like there's a couple of versions, right? One is where he shoves it into her hand. And now we're arguing about whether he shoved it into her hand or whether he handed it to her and she, took it and, was so happy, right?
Well, she has a certain amount of time to throw it down.
But we
Right,
don't
but
have
there's nobody
witnesses to see if
watching.
she did or not.
But you're asking now, will we believe her if
Will
she
we believe
says
her? Yeah,
that she
otherwise,
threw it
because
down in a certain
right.
amount of time?
And there's no, if there are no Ede Masira, then it's his word against hers. And like, I don't fancy her odds.
Again,
I mean, maybe
Or even
we
again,
should
going-
fancy her odds, but
or
like, I
even
don't
again,
know.
going
It
back to the
doesn't
other
seem like
point,
a
yeah,
very
just-
why?
protected
I think it's totally good. I think we would have two witnesses to it. If she would say she did it on time, he said he didn't do it on time, and
Why? How in this
we
world?
would
Like,
we would.
if-
I mean,
if
we
there
could make a
is- if he leaves-
chazaka. We would probably make a chazaka that she remains single. In other words, if everybody agrees that she was single before, and the actual maaseh is in misupak, because he says one thing and she says another, then we'll leave the hazaka, we'll leave the status as it was.
we learned about Gittin that like if he puts it in her property, then that counts as her taking it. And now we're trying to learn from Gittin to Kiddushin, and that like here you don't need, like, what if he leaves it in our house? Now it's right. Then if we don't need witnesses that she accepted,
That's only in a schut. A chatzer is only, right? I mean, I don't understand what you're saying. It has to be a schut. I think getting divorced is a schut, no? Because you're no.
Right? And getting married is not a slute because she's makna herself.
Yeah.
Right. But
Okay.
I think even if we
You
say,
can't
like, I don't know, he throws it into her lap, which does seem to be.
You always need the woman's consent. You cannot marry without the consent of the woman. Maj is asking a different question. What about, is she believed? Yeah, why should she not be believed? Of course, a woman testimony is believed like, in Isurim.
Right,
like
but it seems like the problem is if there's a disagreement about these two things, then what we would normally do, if the actual sort of maaseh is misupak in some way, we would go to the edim and ask them, like, what did you see?
So right? we don't have.
But if there are no edim there, then we can't do that. So then, like,
yeah, but
we're
you
sort of
see,
stuck with these two parties who are.
Okay, so there's a famous
like, there's
a famous, like, I don't know if it's Brisker Torah or if it's just general Torah. There's a famous idea, at least maybe we never discussed it actually, which is there's such a thing as another, I don't want to say it in Hebrew because I'll probably say the wrong word in Hebrew, but it's like, are the witnesses creating the event or are the witnesses witness to the event? Are they just witnesses? The event happened and they're just telling us information about it. And if you think, and if you have witnesses there, then obviously they can do both. They can create the event and be witnesses to it. But our question here, by marriage, the witnesses are not just witnesses to the event, they're creating the event. Without witnesses, it didn't happen. It's not like if I come and say, I married this woman, and she says, yes, she married me. And well, so we know it happened, but there were no witnesses there. It's not kosher. That's the idea. It's not because we need witnesses to create the marriage. But that's why we say you are the witnesses.
Don't we have a lot of examples like that?
What we're saying now is that by writing in Kitav Yado, it's like Mea Edim. So we have witnesses now. But this question is asking a different question. It's about a day of the event, witnesses to whether the event happened or not, which is a secondary purpose that the witnesses have, a secondary ability. And nobody is saying that that's gone on here. The man doesn't have some magical extra power.
But if you hold that you only need Eidei Chatima and the man's own hand stands in for Eidei Chatima, then the other kind of witnessing doesn't exist. Like there's no place for it.
Exactly.
I think that's what Masha is worried about.
The point is, in the wedding, you can't get married unless you have Eidei Kiyum, the Eidim that create the event. So we want to get married, but we didn't have any witnesses. So if he wrote it by hand, that counts as Eidei Kiyum. For sure, it doesn't count as Eidei of the Maaseh. It doesn't count as Eidim of witnesses to whether it happened or not. But it does count as Eidim that create the marriage.
Great. It just seems like that's like a step back towards the Rambam, like the thing the Rambam's worried about like you just get married, Beino Veina, there's nobody there. Like that's like there's a reason we're worried about. The reason the Rambam's worried about that is that it seems like it's not kind of open to the community. And I think one reason you might be worried about that is that you think that that's like
No,
kind of,
yeah, not necessarily. He gives her the get. He gives her this. He's still not married. He still didn't do chuppah. He still didn't do nisuin. He just did kiddushin. We still have 2 stages. But you're right. It is a little bit closer to it because
like I guess he's got to like go say Shava Rachot now. So like that is worth something. But I don't know.
Say by Kesef, we have no way of doing that. By Kesef, you need to have 2 witnesses. But by
and you can't like there's no other way to in any of the various methods. There's no.
No, but you don't need by any document. You don't necessarily have to have witnesses. If I give you a document and I say, here's the, if I do Kinyan Sudar do I need witnesses? The Kinyan, there's 2 separate things. There's one is that there's observation that the event happened, and the other thing is the event. The event happens when I give you a lease, when I sell you my house, the event happened. Whether there are witnesses to it or not is nicer, it's good to have witnesses. But by a marriage, you have to have witnesses. The event didn't happen. And that's all we're discussing now. We're only discussing, are there witnesses to create the event? Not, obviously we don't have witnesses to testify one way or the other whether it happened. And that we're gonna have to rely on the man and the woman. Like I said, if the man and the woman come and say, yes, we're married, are we going to throw it out and say, no, you're not? The father says, and the father didn't want this marriage to happen at all, says, oh, great, they're not married. We're throwing it out because there were no witnesses. And then the rabbi said, no, he hand wrote it, it works. They eloped with no witnesses, and he hand wrote her. Now they're really married. That's the way I understand it. That's the only machloket I can come up with. But if the man says I'm married to her and the woman says I'm not, then she's not married. Why would she be married? No witnesses.
I mean, I think that the argument would be because his hand is like Mea Edim, so it doesn't matter if there are witnesses or not.
I don't think we're going
and
that
that should be disturbing to us, I think.
If that's what it's saying, then it would be disturbing to me, and it should be disturbing to us. But I don't think that's what it's saying. I think that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. I don't think it's saying that it's like Mea Edim of the event. It's Mea Edim in the sense that we have a valid kiddushin.
But like, aren't those the same thing? I just don't I just don't understand what the difference is.
Right. Well, like I said, there's
maybe I just don't get the Brisker point.
Maybe I don't get the Brisker point. But I think the Brisker point is that you need witnesses to effectuate, to bring into reality a wedding. But if those witnesses die, let's say they die the next day, so you also can't ask them anything. If I say there were 2 witnesses at the wedding, and the Kala and the Chatan agree that there were 2 witnesses at the wedding, and the minute after the wedding ended, they both died, and they had a heart attack. So we can't ask them. We have no proof whether it happened or not.
Right, but by Gitin, we're at least sometimes worried about that, right? And that opening sugya of Gitin, where they at least, I don't remember if it's Rava or Rabba, one of them says like, the reason that we need someone to go and testify if a get is brought from Medinat Zayan, the reason we need them to do that is because it's they need to say Befanai Naftam is because we can't bring the agent to testify. I don't remember where that opinion wins or loses. That's so I just learned that sugya. It's really long. But anyway, in that world where you say the reason that we say that the person we need someone to testify befanai naftam is because we can't bring the adim. Seems like the reason we want the adim is to testify to something about the document. Which just seems like the same thing should be going on here.
But are those? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that
I mean, now there's another like.
I don't know the sugya. I don't know Gittin so well. You tell me. Is it deraita that you have to have witnesses at a Gittin? In other words, what is the if a man throws to his wife a get and she says yes, I got a get, and he says yes, I gave it to her. It's not kosher. You need to have two witnesses. Whereas by a wedding, it in that same case, I think it's not kosher. You need to have witnesses.
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't know whether
That's the essential question.
Throwing matters, but I guess all I'm asking is saying, like, it seems like in that sugya there is some concern that you would need to, the reason we want the witnesses on the document is because we want
to be able to check it out afterwards.
We want to be able to check it out afterwards. And if we can't check it out afterwards because they're in Medinat Hayam, then we need someone to kind of validate the whole process. And there seems to be like the stam kind of comes into that sugya and says like, oh no, like what if it says like, is this Eidim? And if it like, is this just like a second kind of Eidut? And the Gemara is like, well, no, because there's only one. Mishnah only seems to require one, so like one person to say b'fanai nefsav, b'fanai nefsam. Anyway, but there it does seem like the purpose of the Eidut is not only to kind of constitute maybe that just doesn't constitute the event, but really to testify about it. Maybe that's
what I would claim is that those witnesses are to testify about the event, and these witnesses are to constitute the event, and therefore they're not comparable. And that that when we say his handwritten note works, we're saying that they can constitute the wedding, but you can't, prove anything in court about whether the wedding happened or not. That's up to we need other information for that. In other words, I'll say it differently. Let's say that video conferencing is not called Eidut, or whether it is or not, I don't know. But let's say it's not called Eidut. And I have two, a man and a woman. A man gives a ring to a woman and marries her, and it's being watched by 1,000 people over conferencing, but there's nobody there. And let's say that, like I said, that's not called edut according to halacha. Whether it is or not, I don't know. So if it's not called, then you might say they're not. Then I think what I'm saying is that they're not married. There were no witnesses. Do we know that the event happened? For sure we know it happened. I'm trying to separate the two concepts. You could be sure that the event happened because you have 100 people watching it, or let's say 100 people who are not Jewish, I don't know, or whatever. We have 100 people watching it. We know it happened, but maybe you could say Anan Sahadi. But the point is, we need witnesses to create the event, irrespective of whether we have proof of the event happening. We could have a lot of proof.
It just seems right. It just seems like here there's neither almost, because the guy I guess the guy writes the document and that creates some sort of pseudo Eidut.
Yeah.
There's nobody watching to make it happen. I don't know. I mean, I think
that's
again,
why
it's only a problem if
saying, I think, is that's the point, is like, if you need Edim, if there's a dispute, right, you need Edim to prove that the event happened when there's a dispute, and therefore this doesn't work if there's a dispute.
Help.
But it doesn't help.
But if there's no dispute, that's the only question. The question here is, when there's no dispute, does a handwritten document count as witnesses? And I think that it's saying.
But I just think you're only going to ask the question: does a handwritten document count in a scenario where one of them, like, it seems like the scenario where one of them somebody thinks they need a get and somebody thinks they don't need a get. And that seems like a case where one way you could produce that case is where one of them thinks that they're married and one of them doesn't.
No, like I said, the father wants to annul the wedding. There's such a thing as the Catholics have this thing called annulling of a wedding. And in Judaism, we kind of also have that thing. If we say that the wedding was never kosher from the beginning, then we annul it. Or do we have to require a get? If the father wants to annul his wedding, he didn't like that his daughter eloped with this man. That's the question. That is the question that we're trying to solve. If they eloped and they did this handwritten document, do we need a get, or can we just say there's no wedding there? And the Chelkat Mecholkek is saying that I think it was the Chelkat Machokik, that you don't need a get at all. And the Aruch HaShulchan said, no, you do need a get. But okay, yeah, whatever. I don't know enough about witnesses to really answer the question properly. But I recall that distinction, like I said, about whether all we're talking about is witnesses to create weddings, not witnesses to testify about whether it happened or not. Although sometimes those witnesses could do both. But this happens to be an interesting case where we can separate those two functions. Because by handwriting it, you're certainly not having any testimony about whether it happened. You're only having testimony about creating. You're only having witnesses for creating. That's the way I'm saying. And then it's not.
When you like at some weddings where they say they like dafka distinguish these people are the Adim and not all the other people, right? Like that move seems like it's about.
No, because if the witnesses are puzzle, then you didn't have, that's exactly the point. That sort of proves my point. In other words, if we would say, you see, that's exactly
then
the
if
point.
the witnesses are puzzled, there was no marriage at all.
Exactly. Right? They actually, I heard the story like this, that in the kibbutzim in the 50s, the rabbis would come and they basically assumed that the people were not going to be faithful to their spouses. And they didn't want to create mamzeri. But yet the people were asking for a rabbi to come and do a wedding. So they would come and say, oh, who should be your witnesses? Oh, let's give an honor to your brother and the Kala's brother. And they would appoint two witnesses who are not kosher. And wait a second, but there's thousands of people there watching it. There are hundreds or tens of people watching it. And certainly some of them are kosher witnesses. And certainly we know the event happened. But
I mean, isn't the whole point of that later when someone comes and says, I need a get, right? Because like, I don't know,
well, the point was really for
husband is in Vassar Ket, and my husband is like a get refuser and whatever. Then that whole move is motivated by an assumption that the people who are going to testify to the reality
we don't need, those people could be dead. We know that the two witnesses,
they're just there to create it. Right?
We used your father and your mother, the father and the mother of the Chatan were the witnesses. They're now long since dead. But we're going to annul the wedding because not because we know the wedding happened. We have a videotape of the wedding. We have thousands of other people who saw it who were kosher witnesses. But the actual witnesses were these two people who were puzzled. So actually we can annul the wedding. There was never a wedding at all. Right. That's the point. That's what I'm saying. But if you would do it with a shtar and handwrite it, then even if then you wouldn't need witnesses. Then you wouldn't need to say, and then you couldn't puzzle in such a way.
Yeah.
So right, that's what I'm saying. There's a kiyum. There's a day kiyumi. I don't know how you say it exactly, but a day kiyum. They create the event as opposed to a day re'iyah or a day edut. Not really called they really should be called edim. They're part of the wedding. Just like you need a chatan and a kala, you need two other witnesses to watch it, to create the wedding. Interesting question whether that's derived to Rabbanan. I'm not sure. I don't know. I assume it's derived, but I don't know the sugya. We're learning Kedusha. We probably should know that sugya. All right. You want to say something more, Sarah?
Oh, it's a different question about Sfik Sfika. It might be more than we bargained for half an hour after Shir was supposed to end.
I'm okay if you're okay.
I'm fine. It's 4 p.m. where I am, so it's fine by me. So if I vaguely remember that really long shah, there's it seems like one of the things they want is like for there to be two fake quote that like overlap in different directions. So it has to be that like there are two potential concerns that are sort of separable from one another, such that you could end up in like any corner of the Punnett square. And it seems like you could do that by saying for this that there's now granted, this is all a safek about what the deen is and not about the realia, so maybe that's a problem, but there's a safek on two axes. One is whether we actually apply ktav yado to kiddushin or not, and then the second one is whether it would be whether only edei chatima would be sufficient. Does that make sense? There's like two, those are the two like overlapping.
Yeah. No, that's his logic. Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
You're right. I mean,
All right.
here, I'll tell you a bad sfeika. Safek, the Torah is true. But no, safek, I'm a Jew. Maybe I'm not a Jew. Maybe it's and
Right.
even if I am a Jew, maybe the Torah isn't true. Maybe the Torah isn't really true. But that's a suffix, because if the Torah, that's not a good suffix, because if the Torah wouldn't be true, then there would be no such thing as Jews.
Yeah.
It's really just one suffix. I mean, in a sense, the other suffix is that they're independent. Yeah, so you're right. But so that's kind of the argument of the Mechilka Machokek, and I don't quite understand the Aruch HaShulchan. If you want to know where it is, I can tell you. Look it up.
From what you read, it seemed like his problem was like this is a safek about what the halacha is, and not a safek about the mitzias. I sort of wonder whether part of what's underneath this is that there is a safek about the mitzias, dafka because no one saw what was happening. Now that's not the safek, but it's
here's what he says: halacha command the spirale tiktav yado have kitav yede edim. Ve'im timsalom da have safek. Ve'im timsalom da have. We still have another suffix. Safekim halacha command amar the edei chatima mahani. That's exactly what he said. Below edei masira. It's Beit Shmuel, not the Chelka Machokek guys. The Beit Shmuel. Vehu safek the mitapech gamken. It's a suffix that can be turned reversed. Safek im dai be'edei chatima. We cannot say it the other way around. Yeah. Suffix if we need enough chatima. This is Zion. Ve'im Tim Salomer should die. Safekim ktav yado have v'li near the end the sveka the low dami the call suffix sveka shas safek who the ikar hamase in general is supposed to be ikar hamase. Shema hayaken. Okay, we don't know whether it was like this or like that. Maybe the meat fell in to the pot,
right?
Or maybe it didn't fall into the pot.
Yeah.
Ve'im tim salomar ken, and even if you say it fell in, maybe there were 60. We spilled it out. It fell. Maybe it fell in, maybe it didn't. And even if it did fall in, maybe there were 60. The fact that it's not 60 now is just because there was a spill.
Right.
We saw a spill. We know there was a spill. You can't just invent a spill, but we know there was a spill, and now we have a suffix. The event is clear. I don't know that's later. Because we know what happened. He gave it without witnesses, and he didn't ktav yado. But safek hem ala din. It's just about the din. Im ken kishebanu ladun al zo haisha have echad safek. Im hi penuya o eshet ish. Umali safek zeh. Ba'u safek zeh. Wait. Umali. This I don't. This sentence is hard. Umali safek zeh. Ba'u safek zeh. I don't know what he means. V'havei kisafek sveka mishem echad.
I think he's just saying that there's only one suffix, which is she married? And for it to be real sveka, we need two. I just wonder whether the two are, one, did he write it lishma, i.e., because there are no sort of along the lines of Masha's point, right? There are no edei chatima. It's only him. So like, I don't know, do we trust his word about his own marriage? That's kind of strange. Right, or like it's sort of right. Maybe I guess what I'm saying is maybe the underlying suffix here is actually we just don't really believe, we don't know what happened because we don't have any testimony about it. We only have this guy's handwritten.
That's not what the Beit Shmuel said, and that's not.
No, that's not what the Beit Shmuel said. I'm just wondering if that like might be a better way of thinking about it.
You're saying another svek is maybe he didn't write
We don't
it.
know if it's Ishma, and we don't know if he gave it to her. Or if he gave it to her in the way that one is like without her throwing it back in the appropriate amount of time.
Well, again, then it would be in the Maaseh.
Yeah, but that's good, right?
That would be
means
good, but that's not the case. That's for sure not the case.
Yeah.
The case is for sure that we know what happened. Everybody knows that he did. We're discussing the halacha in a pure sense. We're not discussing a case. We're discussing the halacha in its purest form, which means we know everything else, holding all other factors as constant, only varying this one factor. We don't have witnesses, but we do have Ktav Yado. All other factors is constant means there's no argument, there's no dispute about the event. Everybody agrees what happened. We're just wondering what's the din when this thing happened. That's all we're learning. So so it's interesting that he's saying you can't say sfeik about a din. I think we do say that sometimes.
Sometimes we do, right? It seems like
Yeah, it seems to me we do sometimes say sfeik in a din. It's a suffix whether the halacha is like, the Ramah, and even if it is like the Ramah, in this case, the Ramah would permit it, or whatever. In this case, the Ramah maybe permits it because we're not clear. I don't know. All right, we better go.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Thanks, everyone. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov. Yeah.